Here you go. Here's your
Let me
seat.
scooch down one for you.
Gang's all here now.
Yep. Just at the elementary open house. It's interesting.
Are you thinking of buying the elementary school?
No. Like, silly.
It's been quite a number of years since I've had to go into the elementary school. Since one is going to graduate college and one is going to graduate high school pretty soon.
Okay. So we should call the meeting to order?
Yeah.
All right. Hi. Today we have September 14th, and this is the Hadley Finance Committee meeting. And we'll call this meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Today our main focus is to go over the form of government, and we have some guest speakers here. Thank you very much for coming. Let's see, we have William Keegan from the town manager of Foxborough, and Tim McInerney.
And Tim's not here tonight.
No,
so
Tim's not here.
no.
Okay. And Sandy Pooler.
Sandy's the finance director.
Finance director. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here. And so this is a different group than what you met with Selectmen last
Right,
time.
so
Yes.
it might be helpful if we did a little bit of how did we get here from there. So back in 2013, we had the Department of Revenue conduct a management report for the town of Hadley. In their recommendations, they talked about developing a strategic vision for the town of Hadley, asking the select board to start thinking 5 years out, putting together priorities and a path to get there. Among the many recommendations of that report were elements having to do with changing the form of government, providing the town administrator with more authority, changing some of the elected positions to appointed positions, making some other changes along the way. In 2016, the Tri-Board picked up that report and started looking into it earnestly and said we need some help with the discussion about the form of government, and maybe the form of government that Hadley has enjoyed for 350 years is not the form of government that Hadley needs for the next 50 years. So we reached out to the MMA. They have a form of government committee that is specifically there to help cities and towns talk about what are their structural and functional needs, what are the available resources that are out there, and what are the do's and don'ts, or perhaps advice of how to avoid bumps in the road along the way. What is the best process for exploring that? That conversation happened in November with Bill Keegan and Tim McInerney, and then it was revisited this spring by the Tri-Board, and there was a discussion about the Finance Committee exploring the form of government further. So we've invited Bill Keegan and Sandy Pooler out to help continue that discussion. Bill is a credentialed ICMA credentialed manager with well over 30 years of experience. He's worked for the towns of Seacon, Dedham, Shrewsbury, and is now the town manager of Foxborough. And Sandy Pooler has an MPA from the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, and is the Chief Administrative Officer for the city of Newton, and then he went to be the Finance Director for the town of Amherst, and now is the Deputy Town Manager for the town of Arlington.
I apologize for the change.
That's all right.
I thought you were still a finance guy. So.
Thank you very much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedules to help out the town of Hadley.
Happy to do it.
So
Last time we came, Tim McInerney, who was my colleague he's a town administrator in Grafton, Mass. We happened to be up here because we were at the MMA Managers Fall meeting at University of Massachusetts. And we met with the board, and we were able to kind of provide them some insight as to the differences between the different forms of government that occur, differences between town manager versus town administrator, which can be subtle in some cases and not very as clear. And also at the same time some guidelines as to you know, it's sort of an indication of what you would like, what you can get with a charter change, or create a charter, or if, in some cases, just create a bylaw. I'm going to give you some handout information tonight that will, you know, provide you with, really, there's three mechanisms. One is to create a bylaw, another one is to create a home rule charter, which is a more formalized process, and then there's another process now that you can just go and do a review and send it to the legislature, do a special act, what's called known as a special act, and you can go to go review it at the town meeting, then send it to the legislature for approval. So those are three real mechanisms available for doing that. The right way to do it is, there's different ways to do it. It really varies upon the community and how much input you want to have into the process. My experience tells me that the ones that are most successful are the ones that have been discussed pretty thoroughly, and that there isn't just a quick change in any one direction. And more often than not everything that people want to see change gets approved. So, which is still okay, because any step towards change is in many ways a good change. The challenges that we face today are similar to virtually every community in Massachusetts and across the country. Is that there is and David knows this because there is a dwindling number of managers that are getting involved in town management. So we're starting to see more and more development of those folks from different walks of life. Some internally developed through their organizations, some their own department of their own towns. Some places like Cambridge and larger cities can develop people within their own staff. Places like on Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, it's hard to get people to move out there because it's very expensive to live there. So they oftentimes will promote for people from within their organizations. The key thing is that, and I think you've all experienced this, is that it's really difficult in today's society to run a community with part-time boards, because it's a huge commitment in time, number one. Two is the fact it's really complex, even for guys like us who've been doing this for a long time. We're not always we're always constantly talking to people across the aisles and across our communities to try and get advice as to how to do things. And I think it seems like more and more these days everything has become more legalized. So we find ourselves on the phone with attorneys a lot, trying to get things clarified, because things are not always as clear as they appear. But having said that, Massachusetts and most communities in New England, for that matter, tend to be run in some of the most purest forms of democracy, and that is, of course, having the town meeting form, which is really the legislature of your town, and having a board of selectmen, an elected board of selectmen, either 3 or 5. So I was interested to find out that there was still the 3-member board of selectmen, is still the largest number of communities in Massachusetts. Still has 3. You would think I thought it was always 5, but it's actually 3. In that this is a time when we're in a period of time where more and more communities are looking at changing from a town meeting form to a council form, primarily because they're having a hard time getting people to show up at town meeting. People are just not participating in government the way they used to.
Look behind you.
And so, and there's different reasons for that. Social media, television. People are busy. They have busy lives. They're both double income homes for the most part. They're busy with their kids. They want to make sure their kids, are well taken care of. All understandable, all good reasons. And more often than not, we end up in situations where we don't have enough people to appoint to boards and committees because there just not enough people that take an interest in doing it. So it's a challenge for all of us now in government. We're not even getting paid professionals to be involved, which is really is a little bit concerning to me. And I've spent my entire life in this business, and Sandy most of his as well, and David too. So it's a little unnerving to see that happen in this business. That said, though, I can tell you that I've worked in virtually all of them, all the situations where the executive secretary, which was the oldest form in many ways, through a town administrator and to a town manager. And I've worked in the city as well. I worked in Florida for 5 years, worked for a city government. The ones that the professional government is the way to go, because it runs a lot more smoother than and trying to reduce the number of decision points is really the goal, because the more people that have decisions along the way really creates conflict and delays the flow of things to be changed. So that's just a nutshell version of what we talked about the last time, and just to offer you, and I'm here to certainly offer any thoughts, further thoughts, and answer any questions you have, and I'll let Sandy say a few words.
Thanks, Bill. I agree with everything you said.
That's good. We didn't even practice that.
I didn't practice. So most of my career has been really focusing on the finance side of the business, and so I've addressed a couple of specific finance issues. One is the issue of elected versus appointed finance positions. In Arlington, we're going through that same conversation now. We have an elected treasurer-collector, and a fellow who had been there for more than 10 years just recently stepped down. New guy ran, and the new guy ran on the platform that he wants to be the last elected treasurer-collector, that he wants to see transform into an appointed position. Because I think, and he has a strong financial background. He's actually the chief financial officer for a company that you would all know the name of. I think it goes hand in hand with some of the things that Bill was saying. So our finance laws are getting increasingly complex over time. So I think the need for professional attention to them is very important. The need for that kind of continuity and professionalism is really key. I also think the key thing is to be able to build a finance team. Any place that I've worked, the most important thing is to have all the finance players playing together. That certainly was it was interesting because that was my experience in Amherst, where as finance director, I had all the key players, the assessor, the comptroller, and the treasurer collector directly report to me, and eventually the IT director, because there's so much tie-in with that. In Arlington, none of those people reports to me. So the treasurer collector is elected, the comptroller works for the selectman and not for the manager. Until recently, the assessor worked for the Board of Assessors. That just changed, so he works for the manager now. And then IT works half for the town manager and half for the school superintendent, because it's a shared position. Nevertheless, I think one of the key things I've tried to do in that job is to form a finance team. So now every month, all of us get together, and that's never happened. Or we just get together and we say, all right, what's going on? What's the treasurer doing this coming month? How's that going to affect the comptroller? We're changing over some of our financial software. How's that going to affect all of us? Oh, it's not good to do that next month because you got to get your bills out? All right, good to know. Doing that with professionals who are all dedicated to getting the job done and who feel a sense that they are on a team together makes a huge difference. And it's made it, I don't want to disparage anybody, but it's made a difference that now that we have some new faces in the room with some different attitudes, it improves the situation. So I guess I can't emphasize enough how important I think that is, and it would be a big step for you to make sure those key financial positions are professional. I also think in the competition that towns are going to have to fill these positions, and Bill is right, I think we're all facing some struggles that way. But if you're going to hire somebody, that person is going to take the job because they think it's a good situation. In other words, they're going to come to work on a good team in a good environment where they can get their work done. And that's going to be true whether it's any of your finance team or whether it's going to be your administrator / manager, whatever. The people who really are out there are going to have a lot of choices these days among jobs, and so you want to structure your job so they can get their job done, because that's people who really care about getting a job done are going to care about the structure and care about the relationships. So I would encourage you, as you're thinking about things, to do it in a way that helps people be effective in their jobs. And then, I guess finally, levels of accountability and reporting really make a difference. I think if you have 5 bosses, you don't have a boss. You need to know what the expectations are of you and how to meet them and who to talk to if you have a question about that. And so I think it is very difficult if employees don't know to whom they're reporting. I know when I was in the city, it was very clear it was the mayor. And even though many of our city councilors wanted to tell the departments how to run things, we always made very clear that we would want them to come through the mayor's office to give them direction, because otherwise they don't know to whom they're accountable. That same principle, I think, applies to how budgets are put together. As you all know, the budget process is a process of dealing with limited resources for unlimited demands. And
throw in a whole bunch of small special interest groups who want to tug
right.
budget in a particular way.
Yeah.
Right, and it's a month-long process to go through that. Ideally, it's a multi-year process, because you're really thinking about where you've come from and where you're going, and you do your long-term planning. And so to have at least within the structure of the government, the departments all understanding that they're going through a central point to present things to the finance committee or to town meeting is important. And I think to help provide you the best advice that you can get in terms of what are the trade-offs and tough choices, it really helps to have that information focused. And then ultimately, I think, all our goals is to be able to present a unified message to town meeting, so that you don't have fights on the floor of town meeting, that the manager or administrator and the finance committee and the select board and the school committee are all working together. And I think again, I don't know all the little details of how you put your budget together here, but I do know, and I have seen in communities that have clear lines of authority, and once you have those clear lines of authority, you have people who are then able to reach out and bring other people together so you can have a conversation together about your budget. It can work very well. There are other communities when people aren't talking to each other, or it's a disaster, and people are fighting all the time. Anyway, those are just some of my thoughts. And
it limits the debate on the town meeting floor, which is something that never goes well. When it's a long-term debate, it usually means that that the people understand it and then understand all the pieces to it. So all the hard work that goes into that really has to make sure that it's well communicated to everyone, so they understand when they get to town meeting. Because as we know, people who show up at town meeting have never even opened the book many times. They'll show up there and then say, okay, what about this? Well, you've been working on it for the past 6 months, right? And so you explain it, and then hopefully they grab it and they'll go with it, but not always the case. So and that's the democracy we live in. So that's why it's really important to communicate as much as possible. So happy to answer questions.
Well, so I have one.
Okay.
I was here.
Just one?
No, several.
good.
I was here last time that you were here, and I got a lot out of that.
Okay.
So, in your opinion, what is the best route for a town of Hadley that's growing, 5,000 plus people, multiple businesses, and so forth? And what do you feel like would be the next step for us to move? Do you see us with a town manager and a specialized finance person, which would probably eliminate us. So do you?
Not necessarily, there's always a finance committee,
Okay.
even in our.
But we
community.
would have less, we would have less.
You may have less involvement in the
Yes.
budget process. I mean, you'll still debate things and you'll still evaluate things, but you're not actually putting the budget together per se.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works here now, apparently.
David
Yeah,
puts
right
the
now,
budget
it's-
Yeah,
together.
David does, yeah, so.
I am for a change of government. I have said it multiple times to our select board. We all work full-time jobs. This is
Yeah,
part-time
right.
to us.
Exactly.
And some of us are on multiple boards within the town. So,
God bless you.
and I know that this finance committee, and ones in the past too, we have the common good of the townspeople, and we really want to work hard and are dedicated to making change and making it better instead of struggling each year, because we struggle each year to get a balanced budget. And we rely on free cash a lot, and I'm not a fan of that. I know that we are, with David, working towards not relying on that each year, but then, we are in situations where something needs to be funded and we don't, we're grasping at straws to get it. So I think that, David does a great job, but his hands are in a lot of pots. I mean, he's got to deal with multiple things, and
Needs to try to make everybody happy.
he needs to try to make everybody
Well,
happy.
both of his hands are tied a little bit.
And he has the select board that he has to answer to as well, and he deals with the budget, and I would like to see a change of government. I just don't know how we go about doing that. And we might be in favor of it, but the select board's not in favor of it. And so then you're butting heads again. And, to me, and I've said to the select board, we gotta unite and work together and accomplish things. And so it could be a hard task.
So let's break it down a little bit, okay?
Okay.
So, I mean, when you have groups that disagree, there's always points of agreement. So try and identify the points of agreement
Right.
and focus on those and work towards that first. The points of disagreement can need to be just analyzed and evaluated to determine, what are the pros and cons, and then ultimately you can either reach agreement or just agree that it's not the way to go. So it goes back to what I said earlier, and your question is a fair question about, is it town manager, is it town administrator, is it something else? I mean, in Massachusetts, there are actually several titles. There's a general manager in Norwood. That position was established many years ago. And there's still a town board. There was a town coordinator for a number of years.
Up in Conway.
In Conway.
Now it's town administrator.
Now it's town administrator. Town administrator seems to be the greatest trend in change. But actually, now we're seeing more town managers being created as opposed to anything. Now, I can tell you that the difference between a town manager and a town administrator is not all that significant in some cases. It really depends upon what the charter says. The charter, if the charter gives, for instance, I was in Dedham for 12 years, and the town administrator's charter there was as strong, if not stronger, than many town manager charters I've seen. So I had a lot of authority, even though I didn't have the title. They later changed it. In fact, it was one of the last things that was worked on before I left there. And I was glad it happened, and I left because I wanted the next person to have that title, not me, so it didn't look as like it was just being changed for me. So it really worked out well, but they changed the authority there and gave more authority to the manager for appointing of positions and having a little more budget authority. But there are a couple things to think about. Do you want to reduce the number of elected positions? Is that a consideration? You want to increase the number of appointed positions? And that's always a challenge too, because whether should it be the manager or should it be the selectman to do that? Because that's always an issue, a consideration. Because politically, you want to try and keep the manager out of the fray as often as possible, so he's not dealing with the politics. That you as the elected board should be dealing with the politics, and he should be dealing with the day-to-day operations. So to some extent, it's good to have the manager involved with the appointing of the staff, particularly all the professionals and department heads, fire chief, police chief, DPW, finance person, accounting, all those positions that should report directly to the manager, because as Sandy correctly pointed out, there should be one voice. We're dealing with a lot of those things because.
So are you saying he should be appointed as or would it be a committee? He would be part of the committee.
Yeah, he would be. In other words, he'd be the person that would recommend, or he would appoint the person. And what happens typically is that the board of selectmen would have veto authority. So in other words, they would have. He would have. I'm recommending the appointment of this person. You have 15 days as a board to to veto it, but you cannot change his decision. They can say no to his decision, and he has to go back and hire a new person. But
So it's like the Supreme Court justice.
Exactly. So, but the board doesn't have the ability to select the person, and the reason that is because he or she is the person who's going to live with that person on a day-to-day basis and has to feel comfortable with their skill level. And it's not the board that's going to be working with them on a direct basis. It's the manager.
It just add, again, from the candidate's point of view, knowing who I might take a job with David because I know David and I respect him and I like him. I mean, I've tried to take my jobs that way, knowing who my boss is going to be. And it's made a huge difference to me that I know who I'm dealing with.
Right.
So I think it's, as Bill says, you can have it where either there's an affirmation by a board or, again, I know in Arlington's case, the manager just has absolute hiring and firing authority for all except some of those positions I told you about before. But again, if you think about it from the perspective of somebody who wants to work for your town, what kind of situation do they want to be in?
Right. And that really is key today because we were just talking about this yesterday. I actually had a former government committee meeting yesterday. There are 17 positions open in Massachusetts right now. I've never seen that happen before. I've never seen that many. So it's a little alarming because that means that, and we're seeing 10, 12, 15 candidates for a job. There used to be 75 to 100, in some cases. So now so what that means is that you have to get your house in order as a community when you go looking for a new candidate, because as Sandy points out correctly, that people want to know who they're going to be working for. And if it's for 3 people, that's okay. I work for a 5-person board, but I know how that board is, and I can work with that board. But everybody has to sort of respect each other's roles, and that's something that happens over time. Is that I respect the board's territory and what they do, and they respect the territory that I have, and it works really well when it's like that. So in answer to your question, it really depends upon what you want to accomplish. If you want to limit the number of appointed boards, or elected boards rather, and give more authority to the manager, then that's one way to address that. The other one is to increase the authority of the finances under the manager's responsibility. You can create a finance operation underneath the town manager, which is, I think we have that same arrangement in Foxborough, where we actually just built a brand new town hall, and we created a wing that just it's all finance. It's just accounting, it has assessors, it has treasury collection, and it has the finance director, and all work in the same way, and they all work together. It's a great team.
You have an HR person as well?
We have, the assistant town manager is the HR director.
Okay.
And she does both. And it's great. She's my right-hand person when it comes to HR. I mean, no question about it.
And what's your population?
We're about 17,000.
Okay.
Don't forget we have Gillette Stadium too.
Right.
So finances are not a huge issue for us. I mean, we're pretty well balanced and really pretty well funded, but we still have challenges, just like everyone else. We want to have great school systems. We all want to keep our property values high. So that means good services, good public safety, good roads, all the things that go with that. So it means making choices every year. So
Just to answer one other aspect of your question about the role of the Finance Committee, even in a strong manager form of government, I think the Finance Committee plays a couple of vital roles. So staff will put together a recommended budget, and then it goes to the Finance Committee for review, and different places have different systems for doing it. In Arlington, we have a 21-member Finance Committee.
Dear God.
Exactly. And I know.
Wow.
Do they
Do you keep
agree?
EOTs available in the sessions?
Do they all agree?
Well, so this is what's interesting about it. They've had the same chair for 20-plus years, maybe 30 years now, and Al Tosti.
Great guy.
Great guy. They do all their work in little committees. So there'll be a committee of 2 that goes to work to meet with the DPW director, and another 2 that goes to the police chief, and another 2, and they come back and they report to the Finance Committee as a whole, so that department heads and the manager hardly ever go to the Finance Committee as a whole, because they do it that way. In Amherst, we had same thing, staff presents a budget, and then departments would come into the Finance Committee and meet. And I think it does a couple of important things. One is it gives the public a sense that somebody's looking at this.
Somebody's paying attention.
And somebody's paying attention to the details, and that and then it's there's always, I think, maybe a little healthy New England skepticism about staff, but that knowing that volunteers are doing this and taking a look, I think makes a difference. So I think that particularly makes a difference when it comes to town meeting, when questions come up and people know, all right, the Finance Committee chair or another Finance Committee member, depending on what the question is, can answer a question about a specific department budget and show the town meeting that somebody has been looking at this. And then, other than that, I'd say in general my experience is that the Finance Committees don't make significant changes. Sometimes they don't make any changes. But it's the process of looking at it and getting questions answered that I think makes a difference and delivers a good message to the public that somebody's doing it. So, in other words, there's still a role for a Finance Committee, even in a strong manager form of government.
Yeah, so here, the different department heads come in and talk to the select board directly,
Okay.
and it's usually a fluff show, It takes 10 minutes, yes, here we are, thank you very much, we're so happy to have you, and rubber stamp, and out the door they go. And it's, I think, a problem.
So do you have who presents the budget to town meeting? Is it-
Well, technically we present the budget to town meeting, but
Yep.
that's only very ceremonial, shall we say.
Mhm.
I mean, David makes the budget. Many of us are new too, so that's
Okay.
there's been a lot of change, right?
Sure.
So I mean, like for myself, I'm still learning the ropes, as it were. So the way it has happened is David presents us with a book, roughly the size of this book, with the budget in it, line by line. And of course, okay, it says DPW, and it says this whole page of line items on there. And I have to, I look at that and I have to believe whatever the DPW manager tells us, because how do I know how many tons of salt the guy's going to use in a winter,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. So we just sort of, this last time around, essentially just went with the flow and didn't make any changes. I mean, maybe minor ones here and there, but that was it. And so that works fine so long as the input and the output balance. Well, now we're in a situation where the input and the output's not balancing. And so now we're, now that we've been through this, the 5 of us have been through the cycle at least once, I think we could be more effective the next time around for the 19 budget.
And, and then we present things too, of where we think that there could be changes made, and the select board just, they have the power to veto it. That's it. No.
And
No.
more likely than not, they will veto it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this
Somebody
gets
get
me to one of
David
my
a drink.
questions. This gets me to one of my questions, and so maybe you can speak to this. I'm wondering more about the dynamic of the financial management team you've been putting together in Arlington, because Arlington seems fairly horizontal, similar to us. And yeah, if you could speak to kind of the budgeting process, the month-over-month kind of analysis you guys do, and how you work together, because there's a bit of confusion about roles and responsibilities here. It might be good to hear how you've been working and kind of where you're trying to push it.
Sure. So first I will say that as far as the budget process goes, as deputy town manager, I am the person who's responsible for putting the budget together. I set up the meetings. I set out the process, and I arranged it so that departments have clear direction as to what our financial expectations are of them. In other words, I say, this is how much money you have next year. Tell me what you're going to do with it. And you can ask me for more, but first we're going to start with, I can balance a budget with this amount, and usually what we've been able to do in the last few years is to do a forecast and say, if you just carry through this number of people, we know what raises they're going to get and the contracts we have with our unions and so forth. How much is it going to cost to run the fire department or the clerk's office, or whatever office you have in town? And usually we say the amount of money you have for supplies and so forth is probably going to be the same as you had last year. It's not very sophisticated, but it's pretty simple. So we start that process with a forecast in the fall, where we have, on the staff level, done some analysis of what our revenues have trended in the past, how much we've collected from our local revenues, how much motor vehicle excise taxes have come in, what our fees and fines have been, and so once we close out the last fiscal year, we see if those trends are continuing. And we have then a kind of a fiscal summit in October, where we have the selectmen, finance committee, a couple from the finance committee, a couple from the selectmen, a couple from the school committee. The superintendent is there, the town manager is there, the treasurer, collector, and the comptroller. I think those are most of the key players. And we all get in a room and we say, all right, let's agree on a revenue number, so that we know, we're all agreeing about from the beginning, how much money do we have? And if you notice that the state's been doing that for a few years too. They have a consensus revenue number they come up with every year in December. And I think that's been a great step for them, because you don't have the squabbling between one branch and another. So let's just figure out how much money we have to spend. Then let's talk about how we want to divvy it up. And in different places, I've seen it work different ways. In Arlington, we've been doing it for enough years, so we sort of have formulas set out that we say the town side's going to grow at 3.25% every year. The school side, their administration and teaching and most of this stuff is going to grow by 3.5%, and SPED's going to grow by 7%. And then we're going to factor in enrollment. So that's our formula there. And everybody knows ahead of time that's what the formula is. Every 2 or 3 years, you might look at that formula again and say, is that adequate? And are we picking the right number? Is 3.25% too rich, too lean? How are our finance looking? But it's baked into a long-term forecast. So what happens then is that by about October, the town manager knows how much money he has to play with and how to allocate that to his departments. And then we do our own internal forecasting and what-ifs. So the what-ifs might be, what if we add another police officer, or what if we expand a certain service that we, give more hours to the library or something like that. And we can do those what-ifs back and forth. But we start out knowing how much money we have, we give the department some direction, we ask them for their input, and then we make those decisions. We then meet individually with each department. The number of conversations, to be frank, at that point, are pretty quick, because from year to year, mostly, there isn't a lot of change. It's continuation of service, a level service budget. At that point, what I really want them to be talking about with me and the manager is, what are their goals and objectives for the next year? What are their what kind of performance indicators do they have to show the public how their tax dollars are being used? And how is what they're doing in the coming year budget fitting into the manager's goals as the managers express them. In our case, the selectmen give the manager his own set of priorities that they want him to accomplish. He then has to translate that down to the staff to see how that gets done. And then under our charter, we have to present the budget by January 15th, which frankly I think is a little early, but it's not unusual for towns to sometimes do that early. I don't know what your schedule is. On the other part of your question was monitoring the budget as you go through the year and so forth. So again, different places. I've been in Amherst. Every quarter, the comptroller would come out with a report that went to the finance committee and to the selectmen to report on what our revenues and spending was. And it was a formal report. We put it up on the website. Everybody can see it. We would make oral presentations to both of those bodies to let them know where spending was. Internally, the comptroller would be on top of spending on a month-to-month basis. As finance director, I'd be looking at spending and revenue on a month-to-month basis and just track those things. And again, make those formal reports, which I thought worked very well. And I think because we had a cohesive financial team that all reported to a finance director, we were able to do that pretty well. In Arlington, I have to say, we're not quite there yet because people have been out on their own. So, our comptroller reports to the selectmen. So that means I can nudge him to do something, but I can't say, okay, hey, it's October 1st, your report's due in 2 weeks. I can ask him, but I would like to keep, what I've been trying to do by doing things like these monthly meetings and having a sense of a team and everybody playing together is get to the point that we can agree, this is how we're going to do it. Would I rather have him directly report to me so that there's no question about it? Yeah, but sometimes you dealt the cards, you play the cards you dealt.
It's diplomacy. That's what it comes down to.
You might remember at the ICMA meeting a few years ago, the one that was in Boston, there was a guy that was talking about the Gore company that makes Gore-Tex, Brady jackets and so forth. And in there, they don't have they have owner and leaders and so forth, but pretty much everybody else is equal, except some people are called leaders, and so they asked, well, how do you become a leader? And they said, well, if you call a meeting and people show up, it's a pretty good sign. So I think a leader, frankly, needs to be a combination of both having the formal authority. I think it is better that way. And then you just have to have the social skills that when you call a meeting, people not only know they have to show up, but they want to show up and make it productive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and it gets me thinking, as we're talking about changing our form of government, one of the first things you said was that taking it in small steps is still progress. I'm wondering what that looks like, or if you've seen that in small towns, because one of my concerns is that, things as a small town can take a very long time. So when you're changing positions from, elected to appointed, or eliminating a board, or, hiring a new staff person, or trying to revamp your financial management team, it can come across as ad hoc and take 5 to 10 years if we're not doing this all in one fell swoop. So obviously it would have to be very well thought out, and the planning process would take a while. But I'm wondering what you've seen in terms of how do you take it piecemeal, or how do you kind of do it in one
it's
brand?
strategic based upon the temperature of your community. So in other words, if your community is ready for a real change, then go for it. Lay it all out there. But if your community says, we kind of like the way things are going, tweak this, tweak that, then you're going to do a measured response with that. So it really depends upon how connected you are with the sense of the community. And then you can go as fast or as slow as you want to go. But I think the question is, if things are going okay, but still you're not getting the level of accountability that you want to see happen, then you need to reduce the number of decision points to a point where it's more centralized. That's what creates accountability. So, I'm going to leave you with some documents tonight that shows you the different steps you can go. You can go bylaw, you can go special act, or you can go home rule petition. So it's different ways to do that. If you're going to do it, and you really should have some professional advice from an attorney, or someone can have to draft the documents so it's written properly, so it will pass muster with the state, and also be a legally upheld in many cases. So you want that to be the case as well. But yeah, it really the answer it depends. All this depends upon what kind of community you want. I've seen places go. Probably the most classic change was Randolph, Mass. Randolph was an executive secretary, board of selectmen, 5-person board of selectmen, open town meeting. They went from that to a town manager council form in one day. It's like that. They decided we're going to change it, we're going to move it, and it took a while to get that one day, but overnight it changed, and it was like a significant change. And you know something? They used to be in the newspaper all the time for all kinds of conflict. It disappeared.
But the community voted on it, right?
The community voted for that. The community voted for that, yeah, they supported it.
How large the community was that?
That was, Randolph's probably around 20, 25,000.
Yeah, I'd say
in that
about
range.
25,000.
Yeah, in that range, but I've also seen a place like Seacon, where I'm from originally. I still live in Seacon, actually. They changed they did it every few years. They would tweak their charter and make a few changes here and there to make it more centralized. Dedham did the same thing. They did it was more of a progressive change. Dedham, before my predecessor Bill Griffin was an executive secretary for him, and when he came and took over, the finances were a disaster, and they had all kinds of money. They just didn't handle it properly. So Bill did a great job of doing that, and then he left, I took over, and then we did all kinds of improvements to the community. Like we did all the capital improvements that need to get done, and so the next thing you know, we're an economic mecca. And it was like, and now when I left, they had more money than they knew what to do with, and that was good, because then they had choices to make. How are we going to improve our infrastructure? How are we going to improve our buildings? How are we going to improve our schools? That gives you options that you don't have if things aren't being managed. That's really no reflection on David, because I know he does a great job. But if you have fewer decision points.
Well, yeah, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
We're pretty much, at the mercy of the whim of whichever special interest comes blowing through these doors.
And that creates a problem, because you wouldn't run your own operation or your own business that way. So why would you want to run your government that way? And think of it. I mean, I'm not one of these big fans that says that business should be run like a government. Government should be run like a business. Some parts of it should though, and that is the fact that it should be run in the sense that in a way that makes financial sense. You wouldn't want to balance your checkbook. You don't write a check to every person who calls upon you and ask for money. You make choices based upon input.
So then, going off of special interests, who initiates and leads the change in the form of government, or the proposal that eventually goes to?
Well, you can do it. You can do it by a special committee, a separate committee that can lead that charge. The selectmen could lead that effort. If you get a combination of the selectmen, the school committee, and the finance committee coming together, or just a completely separate committee altogether that does it. In some cases, they're elected. In some cases, they're appointed. The selectmen. I can tell you the last charter change we did that I was personally involved in was in Dedham. The selectmen created a special committee. They appointed. Each board member appointed a person, and there was 3 or 4 people at large that they appointed. They all agreed on, and that committee was formed. They worked on it for about a year and came back with some changes. Took it to town meeting, got it approved. Went to the legislature. They approved it, and it got voted on in the town as well. And it was pretty thorough. So if the willingness is there on the part of your head policymakers, then to make some changes, then that's a pretty clean process. Westwood used that same process recently. Dedham used it, and that seems to be one that seems to be gaining a lot of momentum in terms of approach.
I appreciate you coming in to talk to us about this, because I'm one of those people who really sort of appreciates the pure form of democracy.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sort of loath to give that up in this sweet little town.
Sure. Yeah.
And but I also recognize the inefficiencies and the difficulty of getting people to step up.
Right.
And so I think I have a better idea now of why this could be a good thing.
Yeah, and you can actually have a comfortable mix of that. So Foxborough, you know, $70 million operation, we have an open town meeting. So, you know, it's still purest form of democracy. I mean, but we have a pretty professional organization that we work in. And all those boards we still meet with all those boards, and the finance committee, the selectmen, and the school committee, and we have great working relationships with all of them. But they are our policy makers, and we respect that, but we guide them in that process. And so all I'm suggesting to you there is that you want to make life easier for yourselves in this case. I'm not saying that's a negative thing in a negative way. It's just the fact that it's a very complex world that we live in, and you need somebody to help guide you through that process.
A question on the elected versus appointed. Is one of them, you have to live in the town if you are,
Town manager?
if you are, no, or maybe on one of the, well, not necessarily, I'm saying like the elected versus appointed, the collection, you know, or the assessors or something like that.
The answer is no.
So if you're appointed,
appointed officials.
There are some communities, like Boston, requires their employees to live within Boston, but I think they're one of the few, I don't know, maybe Springfield does, I don't know.
Now that's appointed. If you were elected though, would
Then you have to live there.
Elected, you have to live there.
So if we moved from elected to appointed, that would open up a lot more of professional people being able
You'd have more
to
people to apply.
apply.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially in a small town like this.
Right, that's what I was thinking. For an organizational chart that you have, are there certain spots that can't be appointed that you have, that are things that we need to be elected?
Well, you always have an elected board of selectmen, an elected school committee. Sometimes you have elected boards of health, sometimes you have elected planning boards, sometimes they're appointed. So it really, but the consistent ones are the school committee and the selectmen. Virtually every place I've seen is like that.
that's exactly right.
So I think beyond that, it's sort of like the town clerk is elected in many places, but it's also appointed in some places too. So it can be anything you want to make it to be in that regard.
Okay. So how would the organizational chart look with the town manager? Would it be the voters, then the select
Selectmen,
board,
right?
And then the town manager,
Right.
and then everyone else?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, and likewise, you have the school committee, the superintendent, the voters, school committee, superintendent, and that's out of the equation as well.
Okay.
So it's really the same type of structure on both sides, if that's the case.
Okay.
I have some information that I wanted to share with you. That this was actually written back in the '90s, so but it goes to show you it hasn't changed that much. So this was written by a good friend and colleague who actually works at the Collins Center now, Marilyn Contreras. Marilyn used to work at DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, and she was the only person in the state that worked on charters. Only person in the state. And she retired, and now she works at the Collins Center. And but she wrote this article back in the '90s, and I think it's really helpful to have this because you can have those myself, but you can pass those up. And then the article speaks to the various forms of government and the reasons why people want to change it. It also talks about, and then in the end, in the last sheet was a chart that we created, the form of government we created back in 2015, showing that that the number of that change is occurring, and there's more town managers occurring now in town administrators than there is anything else. Executive secretaries have more or less dropped to pretty low numbers. And towns with professional administrators are now 254. A number of towns It's 296 overall, so that's a pretty high percentage to have professional managers. And in some way, shape, or form.
Do you have commissions in your towns?
We have a water and sewer commission,
Uh-huh.
and they were elected. And so they deal with, I appoint the public works director, so he actually works for me.
Mm-hmm.
But he works, but he actually works as advisory to the water and sewer commission as well. So he's like their staff person, as well as the town engineer. So we have a water sewer commission, conservation commission. Those are really the only two that I can think of.
Do we have a recreation commission?
Yeah, we have a recreation commission as well. Yeah, that's right.
What's their responsibilities?
Just recreation pretty much oversees all of the playgrounds, all the different all the different recreational programs that we put on. But the maintenance side of that is through Public Works. So we maintain all the fields, and they just primarily focus on recreational programs.
In Arlington, the commission is advisory to the recreation director. The director is a staff position appointed by the manager. And then the recreation commission, same thing in Amherst too.
They're just an advisory board?
They're advisory. It's also they're advisory, but I think they tend to have strong opinions, and they have good connections to the community, which in a recreation area I think is very important, because being in touch with what parents want or sports groups want or so forth, having a forum for that to come forward, I think actually works pretty well.
And the responsibility for hiring their director is felt, who's responsible for that?
In our case, it's the town manager, and the same thing in Arlington. The Recreation Commission in Foxborough is appointed by the Board of Selectmen, as well as the Conservation Commission. So they're not elected.
Oh, they're not elected?
Not elected.
They're appointed?
They're appointed.
Yeah, so it's the same for us, they're not elected. We don't have any elected committees in Arlington that I can think of.
So the only two that were left in Dedham when I left were the Library Commission, Library Trustees, and the Parks Recreation Commission. They were the only ones that were left other than the town clerk and the selectmen and the school committee. That was it.
Are a lot of these, such as like some of the commissions, say the Park and Rec Commission, would they be paid?
No.
No.
Strictly volunteer.
Are there any of the committees that would be paid?
The only one that I've ever seen paid fairly consistently, it's not that way in Foxborough anymore, but is the assessors were paid for a while. In many communities they were paid. But selectmen used to be paid, but they've gotten away from that. In many cases they get paid a little bit, but it's very limited. The reason why they got away from that was because there was always this concern that people would jump on the health insurance program. It would be very expensive to do that.
We're familiar with that problem.
And so, they would have these. They would basically become a selectman because it was a great deal to have the health insurance. And if they were self-employed, it was a win-win for them.
Is the select board paid?
Was that?
Is the select board paid?
In some cases, in our case they are, but they can't help. They don't qualify for health insurance. So there's actually a limitation on that. But there's actually a provision in Chapter 32B that allows you to do that in the general law. So a lot of places have gotten away from that though, because they put that caveat in there and stay away from that. So it's very expensive. It's like $16,000 or $17,000 per person, and it becomes a very expensive proposition.
I mean, but I feel like some of the boards, they put a lot of time in.
Right.
But especially like our planning board, they
Yeah.
do. They put a lot of time in, and they have.
Yeah.
And it's like a full-time job. So if they're not meeting, they're working on it at home.
Yeah.
In some
Do you have a town
cases,
planner or?
No.
that's the only thing we could give them. But going down the road, I see, that we need to be proactive and realize that board's not always going to be there.
Right.
And we need to look beyond the 5-person board. A lot of them have been there for years, and eventually they're going to retire. And do we want to go that route? And I think now we're looking I see looking at each board, where are we going to be in 5 years? I mean, that we have to be proactive right now and not reactive.
I agree with you.
And I think, especially right now with our town buildings, we're being reactive because it was thrown in our face instead of being proactive.
So literally everything is a react.
Yeah, and
Here.
I'd like to see, things run a lot smoother. I'm sure all of us would. And I'd like to, I'd like to see David have more decision-making process without having to wait till the select board, meets. And so all those things that you say, that you reference, appointing new hirees and things like that, of course, the select board should be abreast of all those things, and having a separate financial person plus the finance committee. I think that's huge, and I think, especially now where we're growing and we need to increase services and, finances are being questioned. And so I think that, like you're saying, if you get rid of some of the points and make it more, somebody more responsible.
So maybe what we can do is we can give you some sample charters to look at.
Yeah, that
That
would be
very
great.
helpful.
So that you can start evaluating the different points and compare them along the way. In fact, our organization actually put together a couple model charters that people can, model documents you can look at.
Yeah, that would be great.
So you can start seeing how things become so much more clear to deal with. So I'll give you an example. This past summer, if we didn't have it, so the Board of Selectmen is the licensing authority, of course. So if we did not have 3 or 4 shows at Gillette this summer that the board had to act on, we probably wouldn't have met at all. Because all the things that happen during the summer are things that I can deal with. I can sign contracts, I can approve, I can hire employees, I didn't have to hire any department heads, so I didn't have to bring them before the board for final consideration. So a lot of the day-to-day operations went on, we got a lot of stuff done, but the board didn't have to make any decisions about it because it was all within the authority of the management.
And it should be, because that management's here every day. Again, we're all part-time.
Right.
We all have full-time jobs. We're committed,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, because we are committed and the select board is as well. But we're not here for the day-to-day operations.
So the classic issue that comes up with that kind of conversation is like, well, why should we give all that information, all that authority to one person? If you don't like them, you get rid of them.
Yeah.
Sure.
Bottom line. I mean, if he's not accountable, or if she's not accountable, whoever the manager is, you can make a change. I mean, you have that
Correct.
option. So if they have a responsibility to be professional, they have a responsibility to do the right thing. Are people capable of making mistakes? Oh yeah, that happens.
Absolutely.
We're all human.
That's right.
But it's not done. If it's done, purely with by accident, it happens. But generally speaking, those decisions are going to be pretty well thought out, and pretty well considered.
And I kind of feel like if he had more authority as far as the hiring and so forth, in my opinion, it takes a lot of the politics out of things. And
Well, it lets you plan.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not going to hire somebody if there's no money to hire somebody.
Well,
Right.
it's the old saying that who was it, Bill Parcells? If you want me to be the cook, I have to do all the shopping.
right.
And it's true
That's
because
what my wife says.
well, there you go. But I've said this. I've been in situations where I've been contacted by people that say you should hire this person. I said, look, if you want to hire that person, you don't need me.
That's right.
You really don't. I mean, you want to run it that way, that's your business. Usually that silence is the issue. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to be the person that deals with the person on an everyday basis. I'm going to be the one that deals with that person. If they don't perform well, who is going to deal with that? I do. They're not going to be the person that deals with it.
Well, thank you.
I had one more thing, I think, Sandy, you might be able to help me with this, is what's your thoughts on the tax rate? The split tax rate versus a
Single
single
tax
tax rate?
Keeping in mind that we have tons of big box stores. And
Yeah.
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 So I've worked in communities that have a split tax rate and a single tax rate. Arlington has a single tax rate. Newton had a split tax rate. And Amherst has a single tax rate. So I think a few things. a few factors considered because there's no one right or wrong answer. One is what percentage of your tax base is residential versus all your commercial, industrial. So that, for example, in Arlington, we're 95% residential. So even if we had a split tax rate and we really socked it to the business, you'd see pennies on the residential bills. It really wouldn't make a difference. So in that instance, Arlington is never going to even consider a split tax rate unless or until that commercial side was a much bigger percentage. Now, I don't know what your mix here is, so I imagine it's pretty...
Yeah, 70-30.
70-30.
Okay.
So residential 70?
70 for residential.
Yeah, that's about the mix we have in Foxborough. It is a split tax rate.
So Newton, I'll go to that. I forget what our percentage was, but in Newton, it was also a place that they knew the businesses wanted to be in Newton. It was an attractive location. And even though the Chamber of Commerce came in every year and complained about the split tax rate, you know, if a business wanted to leave, that would be too bad, but somebody else was going to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to make a little bit of a judgment as to how strong you think your commercial market is here. As I say, some people are always going to complain if you raise their taxes. You have to make an independent judgment as to whether you think, hey, you know what, we've got people climbing at the door to open up here, or we've got a lot of empty storefronts and we can't.
Well, we have both. We have a lot of empty stores in the mall, but yet they keep building more malls.
Well,
Have I figured that out yet?
Strip malls, yeah.
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 Well, that's the changing national picture though in this case, because you know, I think the era of the mall is pretty much over. I think what they should be doing now is using those malls to actually convert them into housing of some sort, or a combination of housing and commercial, because they have plenty of parking, they have plenty of space, you know, and they can create a use that actually could be that would self-serve the residents who live there if you put some commercial right in it. So I think that's a change, that's an evolving thing that's going to occur, but with the Amazon era that we're in, most people are going to be ordering things online. That's just the way it is. And I just heard something this morning, a statistic this morning on CNBC that said that right now Amazon controls about 7% of the clothing retail market. If it goes to 25%, virtually all the malls in America will close because they'll drive the business. So that's an interesting trend. So if we're going to watch that, see where that tipping point goes.
But you still have other things that you can't convert to.
Yeah.
You're not going to buy food online, right? Everybody wants to go to
Walmart is starting to do that.
So,
You're gonna start
so
doing
yeah, you will start seeing that.
I want to see the apple before I buy it.
But that's no different than the person who pays their taxes online versus comes in and wants to pay cash or a check, or doesn't want to send it through a lockbox. Some people want, that's a personal preference, but you will have that option as you do. You have Peapod now from Stop and Shop. You can go online, order it, and it'll be at your door.
So one of the things that we've heard when considering a split tax rate is that beyond complaining, the big box stores would drag us through the legal mud, as it were. And that for a small town like us, that just wouldn't be feasible. I mean, have you ever seen that before with smaller towns or in your own community?
I've not seen that.
I don't know why that would give them any more legal standing to challenge their assessments or taxes than, because the split tax rate is pure math.
Yeah.
It's how much you're going to shift. They can complain about their assessments, and so you just, I don't know to what extent you get those abatement applications now from them. Some places somebody files every year, and some places they don't.
Yeah.
So I guess what confidence you have in your assessment system and so
So
forth.
if we raised their taxes 100%, it'd still be less than Amherst. So
Right. Oh yeah, Amherst is ridiculous.
you know, go ahead, move if you want to.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
I pay more in taxes. I still own a house. I'm about to sell it next week, I hope. In Amherst, I pay more in taxes in Amherst than I pay on my house in Somerville.
That's
It's
ridiculous.
unbelievable, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Really?
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
So, I mean, when you have a
Is that because
$21 tax rate, that's what you get.
Is that because the density of housing in Somerville is so high that they don't have to have a very high tax rate? They still collect a lot of revenue. They got
It's
many
because
more houses per
there's-
foot of road to plow.
There's, well, it is dense that way. It is that there's a significant commercial,
Mhm.
and there's a split tax rate, and there's, they have a residential exemption too, so, where some communities, Cambridge, Brookline, a few others do it, where basically every owner-occupied resident is granted a certain amount off on their assessment. I'm just going to pick a number, $100,000, let's say. And so then if your house is worth $400,000, then you're really taxed on $300,000. What it tends to do is shift the taxes from off of the lower valued houses onto the higher valued houses, off of the owner-occupied onto the non-owner occupied, which means tenants, the apartment tenants. So that's some of it, but I think the more significant thing is really that we have Assembly Square. I mean, the amount of new revenue that's come in, it's just phenomenal. I mean, there's some communities around the state that just have those really strong commercial tax bases, and they generate enough revenue to do that.
And what I have wondered about is if there's some way you can structure it so that the businesses are divided, you know, maybe through auditing them or something between, you know, big businesses and little businesses, because I know, you know, we have a lot of small businesses like Quarters Restaurant and,
Mhm.
you know, Shelburne
Mom
Falls
and
Coffee
pop stuff.
Roasters
Sure.
and stuff, and, you know, they're not making it.
And we also have Whole
You know,
Foods,
we-
Trader Joe's, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you don't really, you know, I think that small businesses add to the character of a town, you know, and so I would want to encourage more of that, you know, rather than just sock it to businesses and discourage those, you know, nice little businesses.
We had that same debate in Dedham when I was there, because we tried to do that. It was really hard to do because where do you draw the line? You know, because if you draw the line at 500,000, then people will build up to 500,000,
Yeah.
and they won't, you know, they'll never go beyond that. They'll never improve their property, because if it goes beyond that, then how do people keep it low? So it just got to the point where the market was the market, and people paid it, and they were happy to be there because they were doing well. So the question is going to come down to, you know, if your rate's reasonable to begin with, which like it sounds like it is,
Mhm.
then it'll stay reasonable even if you split it.
Now, I have another question. So, and this is reviewed every year, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So, if we had to split tax rate and we have now town meeting, and all of a sudden they decided to, you know, do a lot of debt exclusions, we're going, because they want all these things, and we're going to, you know, do a override. And so, but the townspeople who are at the town meeting figures, well, this is great because I'm not gonna pay so much, let the commercial pay. Okay, but then, the next year, all of a sudden, it's voted upon, and now we're back at the same tax rate. All of a sudden, these people's taxes go right up. But do we have do you find, because the people at the town meeting are the ones with the special interest, with the ones that are voting, and if they're not paying the bill as much because they're letting the commercial pay the bill, would that be a problem?
Well, I'd be curious to see what Sandy has to say on this, but I can tell you that, you know, when you get to town meeting, obviously the townspeople vote at town meeting. The businesses don't vote at town meeting.
Right.
They just don't.
Mm-hmm.
But when you decide to go to a split tax rate, it's really kind of hard to go back. We've struggled with this a couple of times. Should we go back to one? Because the jump is pretty significant. You get a break the first year, and then you want to keep that break every single year. But if you go back, it's like
Who
$2-3
votes on that?
difference.
Who decides?
It's like
It's like
the tax classification hearing, usually in November, let's say, when you set the tax rate.
Right.
What they are actually doing at that point is they are voting on whether there's going to be any shift. That's the essential, the whole point of the classification hearing. Because everything else is set by that time. You've already voted the budget, you know how much you're spending. The state just wants to know how you're going to set your taxes. Are you going to just do it one rate, or are you going to split it? That's the whole point of it.
So, other than being concerned about the small businesses in town, which we have a lot of farms and so on,
Yeah.
what's the negatives of the split? Because you both seem pretty pro on split tax rate.
It does provide your residents a bit of a break. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And as Sandy said, if businesses think it's not a good, that the rates are too high, they're going to vote with their feet, so to speak. You know, that's really what it comes down to.
So I would say, the negative would only be is if you imposed a split tax rate and it didn't really make a difference on the residential rate, then what do you go through all that trouble for?
Exactly.
Well, so you get extra revenue, right?
No, revenue's the same.
It's neutral,
It's
it's
just
a shift.
It's just a shifting of the revenue.
The pie is the same, it's just how you're splitting it. How much residential is taking versus how much business is taking.
Why is that the case? Why can't the pie get bigger at that point?
Because you're still only assessing the same amount of property. Okay, so the property is the same no matter what version you go with. All you're suggesting is that we think the business should pay a little bit more because they can raise their prices, but we can't just do that with our taxes. We can only do that once a year.
Because your levy
Right.
is Prop 2.5 sets the size of the pie. The rate determines who has to contribute to each portion of that pie. I guess the other thing I would think about, if you think there's a lot of concern, and I don't know, you may already do this, to the extent that you are promoting various tax exemptions for low-income and elderly, and that or tax work-off programs.
There's a number of those out there.
Well, we started doing that actually for the seniors.
Yep, right.
And I guess we're about to do it for the veterans.
So I usually it's not huge numbers, but I think it tells people that you're making an effort to ease the burden on the elderly those elderly who really have trouble affording things. I mean, some elderly are doing just fine, some are not, and so I think it shows the town's compassion when you have programs like that.
I mean, is one possibility to protect the small businesses, do just like you would do with the rentals? If you live in Hadley and you own a business in Hadley, you get one rate, and if you don't live in Hadley, you have a different rate.
I don't think that's legal.
Yeah, you can't do that. That's not illegal. That's illegal.
Well, you can do it with rental property,
You can do it on
right?
And
if you don't live in it, then you get a different rate.
Nobody's living in the quarters.
You don't know that for sure.
But,
that would be a different conversation.
None of my friends are living in the quarters.
Well, I just, if you live in Hadley and you have a house in Hadley and you have a business in Hadley, that's one thing. And if the owner of Whole Foods wants to move to Hadley, I'm sure we'll be happy to have him here and give him a lower tax rate. And he could build a nice big mansion and live in it for us.
So what I'd say, from what I've seen around the state, I have not seen particular programs like that try to differentiate between one kind of business and another. It's very hard to do. There are a lot of decisions that you come down with. B is, I think generally paying taxes as straight as possible is the best policy. So everybody understands it. Nobody thinks, why is somebody getting a deal that I'm not getting? That creates a lot of ill will, even if you're doing it for the best of intentions, and even if you think you have what you think is fair, that doesn't mean your neighbor thinks it's fair. So I think I would just live with the consequences of maybe some businesses might be affected, the mom and pop stores. I'm betting that probably taxes aren't the difference to they're having a successful business or not.
Yeah,
it's are they in a good location? Do they have enough customers?
Is the business doing well?
Is the business that's really what it's mostly all about.
So in the thing that comes out in the wash all the time is that if people really feel they're being overtaxed, they can always go to the assessors and file an abatement. And that process is pretty revealing, because you go to, they say, okay, why do you feel that way? And so here pays less than my house is the exact same as his, and how come I'm being paid, charged more? And usually 9 out of 10 times there's a pretty good explanation for that. The 1%, the one time, somebody made a mistake. That happens. So they make the adjustment, they fix it. Then it all comes out in the wash. But there will always be people who will say, I'm being taxed too much. To the end of time, that will always be the case. But the bottom line is that if it's fair and it's reasonable and it's simple to understand, it's probably the best way to go. I agree.
So then, talking taxes, there's been a lot of discussion about an override for the operational budget, which I think we haven't had for over 50 years.
Or at all ever, right?
Ever.
Okay.
So a common sentiment going around is that if something like this was actually going to pass town meeting, we would get one bite at the apple, as it were. And we have a lot of needs. So we have IT, HR, really non-existent. Fire personnel, which is our number one priority. Eventually, possibly a finance director position. So when thinking about this override, have you seen a lot of other smaller communities that have townspeople very resistant to the idea of their taxes going up and how they handle their growing pains? I mean, should we be trying to go at this all in one bite? Does it work to go year after year for a different thing every time? I mean, it's a tough...
It's a tough question.
Right.
Tough question to answer.
So, one, I think doing the long-term planning and showing, most of us have what I call a structural deficit. That when you get right down to it, that annual 2.5% isn't going to cut it. Even just to keep the things going that you already have. So, to be able to engage key decision makers in a consensus-based understanding of what those numbers are going to look like. So that's what I talked about, that kind of October sets of meetings, and you get everybody in the room and let's agree on the number. We might disagree on the policy, but let's not argue about what the numbers show. And then I guess, yeah, I mean, I could probably talk for 3 hours about overrides, but I guess I would say coming up with some plan. So I think you're going to have to show and answer reasonable questions about how you're effectively using the money you have now. I will also say that there'll be a certain number of unreasonable questions, and people will just think that, you know, you're wasting money, and you know, you can't. There's no place.
That's the culture, you know, of everywhere in the U.S.
Right. So right.
We call them cave people, so this isn't virtually everything.
I'm
And
going to remember that now. That's never going to go away.
Don't use that one.
I can't unhear that.
I like it.
so I know in Amherst a few years ago when they did an override, they had a multi-pronged approach that was a mix of certain cuts and certain revenue additions. And depending on your town and your financial condition, that mix. But you know, just showing that either we've made certain efficiencies and document those and show what all the good work you've done over the years, say we're more efficient in whether it's health insurance or education or whatever the thing is. Don't forget all those wins that you've had, or and show that you're taking a balanced approach, that it's not just more money, but it's also being more efficient and doing more with less, and present that whole story.
It's a very, very good analogy. I would say one thing that we all tend to do in this business is to focus on the numbers and not on the plan. So the first order of business I tell people every time is like, what's your plan? What do you plan to do with the money that you're asking for? Let's focus on agreeing on the plan first, what the organization is going to look like, and then we'll come up with a way to fund it. And then if there's agreement on what we need and what we all should have, then funding it is, it's difficult, but it's not, it can be done if everybody agrees that the fundamental use of the money is
Well, so
acceptable.
we've had that discussion, especially regarding the personnel for fire department. And the select board will sit here and say, oh, yes, yes, yes. but then when it comes time to, you know, making an adjustment in a budget somewhere to make room for those firemen, they just roll over and it's done. And so now we're, you know, so the balanced approach is unbalanced now for us because we tried to suggest places to trim here and trim there, and the special interests file in here, and the select board says, oh, no, we'll never take away your money. And so now we're stuck.
Because one of the things that we're trying to avoid looking forward to an override is slashing non-essentials to make room for firefighters, and then going back to the town meeting and saying, well, we need all this extra money now for these non-essentials that we just cut. It looks a little...
Well, but you wouldn't be asking for that. You would make them more efficient. You know, like we don't have to have coordinators in 6 different departments for all these different recreational things. You could have one professional coordinator that coordinated for a bunch of different things. We've talked about that job sharing over and over again. But when it comes to, you know, okay, we actually want to implement this, nothing.
You know, it got to the point where we had a select board say to us, will you come up with your ideas, we'll come up with ours, and we'll bring it to the town meeting and let them decide.
Yeah, good luck with that.
And I'm like,
that's not going to work.
no, we have to be united here.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's just...
So again, I go back to what I said earlier. Everybody has to get in the room and agree on the plan.
Right. And so what happens if
and then
you
you
don't?
start working on the finances of it.
I also think that sometimes having doing it in a reduced group, so trying to get the whole finance committee and the whole board of selectmen together to have a conversation is tough.
Well, I mean, in our case, it's the 10 of us. It's not that
Right.
area.
No, I still think that's a lot of people. I think 2 from here and 2 from there and maybe 2 from the school committee. Now you're talking about a group that can have a conversation. And then you go back and you report to everybody else. But if you have the full board and the full board, in my experience, that's a harder way to have that conversation.
There's a lot of different ideas going on the table. So it's just the idea is just to get everybody focused, put everybody's idea on paper and then say, okay, where's the points of agreement, where's the points of disagreement?
Well, the only problem with that approach is then when you go to the full board's vote, you might not have the votes that you need because...
Well, then all 6 of those people have to be at those board meetings, though, to be reflective of what that group decided on. So you have to support. They have to support each other in those presentations.
I mean, it's key to have communication. So if you two go, I don't know who's chair or how you're, but if you 2 go, you have to be communicating with your fellow board members and that knowing that you are speaking for everybody. And you know, sometimes it takes some time. You have to go to a meeting. You have to come back and caucus. Next month's meeting, you do, you know, blah blah blah. But I think what I've seen in that atmosphere is personal relationships build between different boards and different groups.
That's right.
And at the end of the day, those are the things that make people be willing to change when they have a personal relationship with somebody. And again, I think it's easier if you just have a couple people from each board trying to do that.
Well, my only objection to that is from my own personal experience. It seems like we come to select board and we come to finance committee meeting, and then next week we come again, and it's like the whole thing changed while I was gone for a week. Even though there were no scheduled meetings, all of a sudden everything, I'm like, what happened? Everything was different now, and so it's like, you know.
Well, the other problem is a lot of the people on the select board don't see eye to eye, so they're very split too. In cases.
David has something you'd like to say.
Yeah, so we're sort of we're picking up the conversation from the end of your last meeting when we were talking about getting the boards together in a way that, Sandy, you just described. You asked for some people to facilitate that process. Brian West said yes. And I talked to our good colleague Wendy Foxman up in Deerfield, who is a trained mediator as well as a town administrator, and she said she'd be willing to help out as well. So I think we've got some good allies who would help out with that process and
Is the
start
select board
building that kind
Building a coalition, if you will.
Exactly.
Is the select board, have they agreed with that?
I've talked to the chair only. She's on board.
Right.
Okay, so you've already preached to the choir.
Not, it's not like you preach to one choir member.
That's
Right,
it.
right.
Because the
Well, that's the only one that's in the choir.
That's the only
Our chair was in Italy last week.
Oh, okay.
Just picking up the pieces.
So also, I think, I want to thank you guys for coming, and
Pleasure.
it's 8:30 and we still have to vote on the warrant.
Yeah.
So if anybody else has any more questions?
Really quick, because I promised I'd ask for a capital planning committee.
Yeah.
The current issue that we're going through right now, it's basically the way we fund a lot of our capital projects. If it doesn't come out of revolving funds, and David, correct me where I'm wrong, is we're doing it either through capital stabilization, which comes primarily from free cash when there's any left over, and then through capital override on a year-by-year basis. So one of my suggestions, learning from the DLS and the reports, was that we try to shift into the operating budget a set amount that goes into capital stabilization every year that we can use for a long-term capital plan. So I'm wondering, what does your capital planning look like in your respective towns, and how does it get budgeted out? Yeah, briefly, but just kind of for some guidelines that we can kind of work off of.
Well, we have a 5-year capital plan that, and we evaluate, and it's, what falls into that is anything that's it's different criteria. I mean, it's primarily things that are items that are considered to be, you have like in some cases they have a 20-year lifespan, like a fire truck or a DPW vehicle, something like 15 years in some cases. Something over $25,000, a minimum expense for $25,000, maybe $50,000. It's expensive because things are getting more expensive as time goes on. Things that are used on a regular basis. Now we've taken things like police cruisers out because we replace them every year. We search through so many every single year, so we put them in the operating expense now.
Because some come out and some go in.
Some come in, yeah, every year. We replace, I think we do 3 every year. Computers, we treat them as operating expense because we replace so many every single year.
I think anyone would love to have their computer replaced even once.
Yeah, I mean, but those are the kind of things you have to look at and you have to evaluate and what you're capable of doing. I mean, not everybody's capable of doing that. But, and we evaluate, and and there's been some discussion about how we do it. The town manager is responsible for putting the capital plan together. But what we do in Foxborough is that we have a subcommittee that's made up of the school superintendent, DPW director, finance director. There's not a voting member, but is sort of puts that plan together. There's a finance committee member, a school committee.
And we have something similar. I'm wondering more, I guess, the funding mechanisms for.
So the funding mechanisms are typically, if they're capital expenses, we typically would use free cash, or we would borrow in some cases, depending upon the size of the expenditure. We try to stay away from short-term borrowing if we can. Buildings typically are borrowed, obviously, or debt exclusion in many cases. We did build a town hall without debt exclusion recently. It's about $8 million we spent just by borrowing, so we were able to do that. So then the things that we use are, we look at all our funds that we have that are considered to be one-time monies, and we spend it that way. We try not to use, we don't use one-time monies against the budget. We typically don't. We can use it in certain instances. If there's like cruises, we might pay for cruises with free cash, that type of thing. But,
So even though you do 3 a year, you don't just put that in as part of the police budget that you're going to buy?
Well, we do, but it's how we pay for those. We may use free cash to buy those because it may be a year we only need to buy 2. All right, so you can get away with that. And if you don't have as much free cash one year, you may be able to make those decisions. But things that some of the bigger expenses we might do some short-term borrowing to do that, but we try to stay away from that. It's different philosophies in different places. We use that a little bit different type of philosophy in Dedham than I did in Foxborough, and even a different one in Seacon for that.
And then, quick question about how much of your total operating budget would you say goes towards capital expenses, non-building?
See, our capital plan runs somewhere around $4 to $5 million a year in that range.
Out of
a $7 million budget.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think if you can get to a position where you know you're going to spend a certain percentage of your budget on capital every year, I think ideally, 5% is a good number. And so that's, that sometimes it's hard to get to, but knowing that you have that money every year allows you to do some long-term planning.
Right.
And allows you to say, and allows departments to be willing to say, I'm willing to give up getting something this year because I know there's money next year, so I don't have to grab it this year.
That's probably one of the best capital planning processes I've seen in the state, by the way. Arlington. It's terrific.
So
it's really well done.
We do have I didn't create it, so other people did a very good job. But I've also seen people take little steps. So in Arlington, what we also did is, the last time there was an override, they said to people, we know the roads are in bad shape. So of this $6 million override, we are going to dedicate every year, they started with a certain number, I'm going to say it was $400,000 of that. And of that long-term permanent override, every year we're going to spend $400,000 of that on roads, and it's going to go up 2.5% a year. So it's just built in. And so when people were voting, they knew that they were getting both operating money and they were getting some permanent.
Some roads, yeah.
And if you talk to John Trickey up in Pelham, who's on the finance committee there, even Pelham did something similar where they had an override. They built a much smaller amount in, but they built that in so that every year that they know that they have that money. And what they tend to do is bank it for a few years until they've built up enough to buy something, and then they pay cash because they don't ever want to borrow. That's just their philosophy. But they know they have that stream that's coming in every year. That's a baseline, so you're not worrying about your free cash going up and down all the time. So I would try to get to and just one more thing I would say about that. If you know that you have to dedicate 5% of the budget, let's say, to capital, that means you got 95% for everything else. So then you know you have to live within that 95%. So that's going to affect your hiring, your bargaining, whether you're hiring more, firefighters or recreation aides, whatever. You know that capital has to be protected and can't just be dipped into because we've got a policy that we've all agreed on. So I would try to get
again agree on the plan first and then finance it afterwards. So another point that and Sandy Trick just tipped me off for this one, even when he was talking about that, the meals tax money. Right, we did the meals tax in Foxborough, right? So that amount of money, generates X amount of money each year. But we said the only things we're going to use that on is to pay down our OPEB liability and to pay off the and to improve our roads. So now we're at a point now. Our roads are in such a condition. We're at a close to about an 84, 85 level, which is the measurement. That we're going to stop putting some money aside towards buildings. So we'll take some of that money and we'll put it towards buildings, towards a building fund, so a building repair fund and replacement fund.
And then if the roads decay, you'll go back.
We'll go back. Yeah. But we'll put everything on a replacement, on the roads on a maintenance cycle, which we'll put so much money into it every year, continue to do that, but we're not doing major reconstruction because the roads are in good shape now. And we're going to maintain them at a certain level. So that's what you do. I mean, you get to that point, and then you can start making other decisions based on that approach.
Thank you, guys.
I have one more. Sorry. CPA. Do you have CPA in your community?
We do not, and I didn't have it in Dedham either. And I think they have it in. They do have it in Seacon now. The Community Preservation Act is, I always thought it was a great tool to use if you can get people to agree to it, because it's a set of money, it's an amount of money that you can use towards almost anything. I mean, it's pretty flexible for, like, especially buildings and for
if they're historic, yeah.
If they're historic, yeah.
Well, we do have it. I think
We do.
one of our concerns is that's being underutilized.
Yeah.
Right, 'cause there's a
They're
big bank
just-
account there, and
Okay,
And it seems like that it hasn't been, there's a lot of restrictions on it.
I see.
Based off of, this has to be done a certain way, historic. The
Yeah.
other thing
Yeah.
is, as the state starts giving less and less towards that.
Yep.
You know, or what I'm thinking, is that it's still a good idea to have, I mean, if the state's not, say the state stops contributing to that altogether, you know, maybe we could use that in a different way.
Well, it's a source of revenue, so the question then becomes, if the restrictions get removed on it, then you can use it any way you want. But until those restrictions are removed, you have to go to limited means.
So yeah, I guess if you went to the voters and said, we're going to get rid of CPA, but we're going to switch that off with an override of an equal amount, then maybe you're okay. But I guess I'd never give up a bird in the hand. I think the other thing I would say is, I don't know if what you're running into is just that there are restrictions on how you can spend the money, or in some communities, I'm not saying it's here, the CPA committee thinks that money is their money, as opposed to thinking it's the town's money and the taxpayers' money. And maybe having a little conversation in that regard is what's necessary. Again, I don't know what's going on here.
But that has been a challenge. I've seen it happen as well.
Oh, yeah. Our Arlington Capital Committees has said, if it's CPA eligible, we expect them to pay for it. We're not going to fund it out of our capital budget anymore, period. So, very clear.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's about as clear as it gets.
Yep.
Everybody likes clear. They may not like it. They may not like the answer, but everybody does like clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree with that.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
All right.
All right, thank you
That
all.
helps
Good
a lot.
luck.
Thank you all. Best of luck to
And
you.
thank you for eating
All right.
in town tonight.
What's that?
Thank you for eating
Oh,
out.
yeah, I helped.
That's 2% is gone.
Thank you, sir.
Nice seeing you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Take care.
Thanks, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Good to see you again.
Yeah,
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Good to meet you.
much. Thank you.
Well, but,
All right.
Very helpful.
good. If there are other questions you want to funnel through, Dave,
I'll try and get him some examples of charters so he can start looking at.
Yeah, that would be actually also very helpful. We have a plan to at least follow by for a little bit.
Yeah. Take a look at a few of them, see what you think. Okay.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Hey, no
Pleasure.
problem.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Anytime, Dave. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.
All right, so now we got a warrant. Got to go through.
See, I'll have to look it up, I don't know.
That was awesome.
Yes,
That was pretty good. I gotta pull that one out.
So let's talk a little bit about the calendar.
Okay.
The select board is meeting next Wednesday. They're going to be signing the warrant. It has to be posted on Thursday. I'm going to turn the air conditioner on.
I'm like sick. Okay.
So the warrant will be printed with whatever recommendations are made or whatever recommendations are pending. You may wish to have that warrant posted with your recommendation pending, given the lateness of the hour and the condensed time frame in which we're trying to get everything done. So I'm not trying to pressure you to make votes tonight. I just want to let you know that
So, you said it has to be done on the 20th.
on the 20th I have to have the selectmen sign the warrant.
So
Okay.
our meeting on the 21st won't work.
So, if
We could meet on the 19th. I don't know.
If you-
we felt, if we go through it.
That's Tuesday.
I would have to file your posting tomorrow morning in order for that to work.
Okay.
So let me know.
I can do Tuesday the 19th at 7 o'clock.
I think I can too.
That's next Tuesday?
And it would be no 21st, no Thursday.
Right, we would move that meeting. Right?
No, I can't be, if we have to go to select board on Wednesday, I can't go to that. So I can do
No.
Tuesday.
We could do Tuesday.
Yeah.
Gabriel?
Yeah, Tuesday works.
Can we we'd like to move our meeting from the 21st.
I'll take care of the
Till the
posting for
19th.
you.
And that will be
Okay.
the warrant.
That'll be nothing but warrant.
Nothing but warrant.
Nothing but warrant.
Great.
All right, so
Can I ask you questions?
Of course.
Why my head's still not in a cloud here. DPW,
Yes,
$3,000
yes,
for, it was voted on in the spring.
yes,
Is it in this
it is.
warrant and
Yeah.
where? For the engineering and are those both cheaters?
Yes, they're both cheaters.
Isn't that where you asked for the money back?
No,
Okay, so.
no, that was
All right,
out
here
of
we go.
building maintenance.
Oh, it's not that 3,000
Wait, where are you now,
that
David?
you're talking
I
about?
have it.
No. Oh, it might be.
All right, wait, I'm in the wrong place here.
And then you took 3,000 out of
Okay.
building maintenance, right? You gave that back?
That adjustment was already done. That's not in here.
Okay, so where's the 3,000?
3,000 is, okay, on budget number 422. It's in two places. In engineering services for 1,000 and gasoline for 2,000.
Okay, and so, all right, so that's in their budget then, right?
That's in here.
It's in here.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other thing is that 8,000 for the retiring employee.
That's out. That's gone now.
Yeah, but he had to take it out of wages.
But we're gonna save enough in non-paid wages to make up the difference, so we've been able to make that disappear.
I know, okay, so that's fine, it works this time.
Yep.
Because now, he's eventually gonna hire somebody else,
Right.
right? Which, so you're taking that 8,000 out of the wages that
But
you
that was the one-
assuming he's not gonna earn until he hires somebody else.
But that's a one-time expense, so we don't have to think about it in terms of 8,000 rolling forward in 2000 into.
No, I'm just trying to get the sense of when retirees retire, and we have to pay them off, kind of like Huckwitz, where'd that money come from?
That would normally come, if it's a planned retirement, then we build up some money within the budget that is presented at annual town meeting, so that payment is already factored into the budget.
Right, so did you know about this $8,000?
I knew that we had a planned retirement back just before town meeting,
Before the budget?
before the budget.
So shouldn't have been built into his budget, not planning on taking it out of his wages?
So what we did was we have deferred a number of hirings, and we're going to be hiring the replacement at a lesser amount. That makes up the 8,000, so we didn't have to build into the annual town meeting budget the $8,000. And when it was presented here as a draft budget request for the special town meeting, I challenged that and had sent it back. And the numbers that bear us out that we don't have to raise the additional $8,000. So we were covered both ways.
Okay, and so my next thing, because this, I do work for DPW, and I know that in Northampton and other towns, the pay schedules, the rates are out of whack. So when we ask a new employee coming into the DPW, say, who's gonna have several required licenses and so forth, you're not necessarily going to get people that are going to start at such a lower rate. So what are we doing about looking at the pay scales and adjusting them to today versus 10 years ago?
All right.
Especially because we're requiring, or the DPW requires, we'll say DPW, certain licenses for these people to have
Yep.
and carry, and that makes them more valuable. Just like the kind of the mechanic thing, because where I'm working too, here you gotta hire a mechanic and start them off at $18 an hour, but they're going to diesel college and they're required to have licenses and much more experience than when you hire that mechanic that retired after 40 years. You see what I'm saying? So it's
Right.
kind of like, I get the select board wants to hire everybody coming
So
in at the beginning.
let me just
Lauren?
stop you for a moment.
Okay.
Because the hour is late and we're in the weeds on this one.
I get that, but I
Right.
don't want the conversation to not carry over to our next meeting, because I
Right.
think it's important.
Okay, so these are all union contracts that we're talking about. Those,
Mhm.
all 6 union contracts
Right.
are up for renewal this year. We're going to be working on them in the next couple of weeks. So all of this has to be determined by collective bargaining. There are certain requirements for working in the DPW. You've got to have your CDL, got to have your driver's license, got to have
Hoisting licenses.
licenses. And if
Water
you're gonna-
department, you're gonna have a lot of licenses.
Right, if you're going to be working on certain pieces of equipment, you need additional licenses. Those are conditions of employment,
Mhm.
you know, for the most part, not all of those licenses, but mostly.
Right.
If they don't have them, they're not,
Oops, sorry.
they need to get them within a certain period of time, or else they just don't have a job. So
Exactly, but
the-
my,
the pay scale is tied into that. They're not applying to the job. If they, you know, they apply for the job, they should have these licenses in place, or the expectation that they're going to be getting these licenses.
when was the last time your pay scales were looked at and adjusted? Or
Last
not
time.
adjusted?
Last time we negotiated the contract, so that was 2.5 years ago.
So it's up to the union to say, I want, or actually, it's actually up to the town, isn't it? To say, okay, we're gonna do an analysis of everybody's job and see if didn't we do that, or we're thinking about doing that?
Yeah, so I submitted to the select board back in December a wage review
Right.
for the town. And I reminded the select board that I did that, and so we need to pick that up again, carry that forward.
Okay,
All right.
so that's something that we need to bring back to the select board.
Yeah, can we talk about this?
Well, I have a question, yes.
All right.
So we have, and so I'm actually not in the spirit of planning. I want to ask a question and then see how the board feels about how we're going to proceed here. So the way I read this, the only difference between the non-contingent appropriation budget and the contingent appropriation budget is $220,349 for the hiring of the firemen, and at the end of this, the $50,000 that we owe OPEB.
So,
Is that correct or not?
so the contingent appropriation consists of the following. So,
If that was raises too.
let me just walk everybody through this so that you understand the mechanics of what's being done here. This is the affected department.
Yeah.
The next column is the amount that was voted at annual town meeting. We have a balanced budget based upon that column. The next column is the adjustments that I made over the past weekend to provide everybody with a modest 1.5% COLA and make other adjustments where necessary, such as the insurance. We know that we need $1,000 to fund all of our property insurance. The $3,000 for DPW. I also reduced Park and Rec by about $22,000 because they have a position that was funded that they're not going to fill. So that position can go away and the savings can go back into funding the budget. And they're filling a position at less than the hourly rate that the previous incumbent was earning. So there's a differential there of about $4,000 or $5,000.
What's the rate?
Well, I built in a little cushion because we've been paying on 2 different rates, so I just wanted to make sure it was enough to get us through the year. So anyways, there's like a $22,000 reduction in budget there.
So what did they hire her for at?
I don't know.
Okay.
So the biggest thing that I see here is that if the contingent override doesn't pass, we don't get more firefighters.
And we don't fund OPEB at the level
We
that
don't-
we should be.
right.
Okay.
Which I remember the board saying that we wanted, regardless of any. contingent
Well, so that's the
override.
thing. What do we do in the case that the contingent doesn't pass? Where do we get the $250,000 from? Do we slash and
let's-
burn everything else, or how do we do
let's-
that?
Let's stop for a moment, because I haven't fully described the mechanics of all of this, and I
Okay.
just want to make sure everybody is on the page. So this column here that I've made an adjustment, the net is about $9,000 total, given that we're taking money away from Park and Rec, which they don't need, and they don't plan to use. So, so we can balance that budget as well, and have about $52,000 of free cash left at the end to use.
So if you say this middle one goes down, we'll still have 52,000 free cash.
That's correct.
And you're funding the fire department's for additional employees for 6 months.
Well, hold on. There's more. Okay. So this final column here is the contingent appropriation. That consists of a total increase of $207,000, I believe.
270.
270, excuse me, I'm switching a number. 270. All right, that pays for 4 firefighters. We've hired one, but we did it by taking money from OPEB. So we have to think about 4 firefighters for a 12-month period, so that we're setting ourselves up for a sustainable fire staffing plan
into the future.
in the future. We also have to restore the OPEB funding, and we have to add to the fire expenses the additional costs for bringing these other people
Health
on
insurance.
board. We have not calculated out the benefit part of this, so that's a number that's still sort of floating around there.
Well, so the maximum there would be 15K per guy if they all did families, or girl for that matter. So you're talking about another 60.
That's
Right.
about-
Maximum.
That's about right.
So you're working on those numbers.
Right. That's a good estimate, if they all take the
If that would
top,
be, if
the
they all,
top amount.
right, if they all took family plan or whatever it is.
So if this passes as well, okay, you still have a balanced budget with $52,000 of free cash to be used towards the capital. That number is slightly higher than the number I gave you on Monday.
Was
I
the
was
free
talking
cash
about-
certified?
Free cash has not been certified yet, but it's been submitted, so.
Well, let's assume that it passes muster or whatever it is that it has to do.
Yeah.
So that still brings us back to the same question that what do we do in the case that the contingent override doesn't pass? Do we need to know, when I asked this last time, we need to know what our obligations legally are and what our, so we know where we can go after this money, because it seems like we've all agreed a number of times that the safety of the town is paramount.
Right, so going back into the budget, let's say that you had to do some sort of reduction. By the way, the contingent appropriation means that if this passes, then you have what you need in order to fund the
Till the
OPEB
end of
and-
the year.
No,
No, it goes
it's
forward.
Forever, it's an
permanent.
override.
It's an
Oh,
override.
Oh, right, the override.
It's just another word for it.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
They're just using this, but this is,
I get
you're
that.
saying
I'm not
override.
thinking
Yeah,
straight.
so there's a whole lot of, have you noticed that there's a whole lot of words that mean taxes?
Yeah.
That they just don't want to use that word, they call it all different kinds of things.
And how's your select board feel on this?
They've taken under advisement. They had a robust discussion about it last night, and so they're going to be taking their votes on Wednesday next.
So I want to bring up this
So,
document here.
Which is,
Oh.
yeah, which is on the back of your warrant, by the way. Just tacked it onto the back of it.
Daniel has let us know now that in order to pass that 270, it's going to increase the bill to the average single-family household, blah, 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 $89.40.
Yeah.
on top of what?
On top of the, whatever 90 it was for the buildings.
Mhm.
So that makes the discussion about a split tax rate that much more interesting.
I know, but and the other thing is, when we do, and we'll have a public forum, using some of this terminology, to contingent appropriations, I think we need to be honest and just say
Use
what it
plain
is.
language.
Say it what it is.
Yeah, we have to use the language that the state requires us to use.
I know,
But we can speak plainly to our friends and neighbors.
right. I mean, because I feel that so many times the more open you are, the more honest you are, you get more out of it. And to try to hide, you know, and I know this is
Nobody's hiding
not,
anything.
it's not really hiding, but it's
Yeah.
just, you know.
This is all posted online.
Well, but I think what she's getting at is that there's a lot of euphemisms that get tossed around.
You may call it whatever you wish, but for the purposes of getting it past the Department of Revenue, we have to use their language in order to make sure it's done, but we can be very plain with our language.
So it means a 2.5% increase on top of where we are already.
Yep.
So here's my thing.
But here are the advantages. Okay, so you're setting your tax rate on time, which is of paramount importance. You're providing for the future. You're setting yourself up in a good way. You're restoring your OPEB and you're funding your firefighters at the position that they need to be. There are a lot of good reasons to be doing it this way. Of all the different ways I can think of this, I think this is your best option.
So so we go to town meeting and we present this and we try to get this to pass, the override. Does it have to go to a vote later, like
Yes.
through the ballot?
Yes,
Mhm.
it'll go on the same ballot as the library and the senior center and everything else,
Yes,
right?
it will.
So here's my thing. The taxpayers look at us for us to best manage these funds. Correct? So they're gonna get up there and they could ask us, you know, why is it we need more money? Are we managing the funds that we have to the best of our ability? Can you honestly say, yes, we are?
Well, to
That's
that
right.
point, if we're getting up there and saying that fire is of the utmost importance, funding our fire personnel, then why is it only with the override we're funding fire? I do think that we should have it in the column of non-contingent appropriations, a plan for funding fire even if it fails.
I 100% agree with
I
that.
I agree with that too. That's
And
right.
If you do that, then you're gonna have to find $270,000.
Well, and this is
in the
why
budget.
I asked you ages ago to tell me what lines on here are we legally obligated to pay, and what lines are we not, so that we know where we can make cuts.
So your budget is about $19 million, and the places that you can go to are about $2 million out of the 19. So you're going to have to find $270,000 out of $2 million, and that you're talking about shutting down programs at that point.
And no, not necessarily shutting down programs, but combining resources and jobs.
Well, the time is so
descriptions
short
and-
at this point that all we can really do is say, of that $2 million, trim 257,000 out and divide it up equally amongst all the parties
No,
concerned.
well, I don't agree with that necessarily. I think that your essential police and fire
No, but those are,
and your DPW cannot shave anymore.
well, but
They're at bare bones.
we made a lot of attempt to identify places where cuts could be made, and those suggestions were voted down by the select board. So now we're in a position where we have one time meeting left.
Well, I would take those 3 departments out of it. Those are essential personnel.
Well, so maybe we need to go through the list first and
So
say
let's-
what's essential and
Also,
what's
let's
not.
look at this list too. This is the list where a lot of money comes back that is not used, right?
That's your free cash.
Well, it's your free cash, but what I'm saying is,
Which you
these are
rely on every
departments,
year.
yeah, but these are departments that
Well, but for any
we over
given,
budget.
well, but is it consistent year over year, or
A
is
lot of
it?
them are consistent year over year, right?
That's where you get your free cash to hope that we can balance our budget with at the end of the year.
Now, this free cash that you gave us before, was that
Right.
last year's, everything from last year, right?
Which free cash, the 484?
Yeah. Well, the 480 Oh, we got 410. Remember
Where'd
we
you get that?
This was something,
Yeah, he handed this out like a few weeks ago.
Right.
so this money that you handed us here, this is,
That's part of free cash. It's
Right.
part of what makes up free cash.
Right.
So you got a number of money, you got money that goes into it, you got money that comes out of it. And what the accountant is telling me is that it's $485,000 is the free cash that's going to get certified.
And that's what saved us for.
Year after year.
Yeah, and you don't want to rely on that.
no, you don't want to.
So that's one of the benefits of this particular approach is that you're preserving mostly, not entirely, but mostly the free cash, the new free cash spending policy. Our target was $75,000. We've been able to scrape together $52,000, maybe a little bit more, depending upon some of the decisions that still need to be made. So you've reserved a chunk of free cash which is close to your target for capital, and that's funding a lot of your capital.
The other thing is when you did the fire and you gave the COLA to the fire, did you increase all the four, including the new 4 firefighters COLA? Because it seemed like, well, it
Yes,
just seemed
yes,
like
I
it was
did.
a large amount for the increase. And
Why
then
would you
just-
give a COLA to somebody who hasn't even been hired yet?
Right.
Well, you gotta, if you're gonna adjust the whole pay range, then it's gonna be adjusted for everybody. All right,
So that would be considered an overage at the end of the year, which would come back to us.
yeah, but I mean, you're talking about
It's not a lot of money.
not a lot of money
Right.
there.
Well, so instead of, let's get out of the weeds for a second. And let's go back to a little higher view. Are we willing to, sorry, I realize I have to, otherwise it doesn't work as well. Maybe you should sit over there, then you can see us.
It's hard to remember that.
That's just I feel like I put my back to you and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Then you can see us all and it'd be better. So if we take a higher level
No,
view,
face you here.
what are we willing to cut? You know, I threw out there just for argument's sake, we're going to take an equal percentage across everything that we can take from. And then, of course, that started the cascade about the DPW and all of that. But we have to
And the fire
identify,
and police,
well,
essentials.
well, but before that, David said of the 17 million, we have 2 million that's not essential. And I don't know what that 2 million consists of.
I said 2 million that you could manipulate.
Okay, so but what is,
So let's walk through it.
okay, let's do that because that's what we need to know. We need to know what we can cut, what we can't cut.
And is it possible too, just to get a lower number of cuts that we're doing, and, you know, just to throw out there, instead, I know that the union got 1.5, but maybe we just do 1.
Well, if it's a
You can't-
union, you can't change
No,
it.
for the non-union here.
Why would you do that?
Well, I'm just saying if we needed a number. I mean,
No,
just to
because-
get it to,
You know, rather than non-union, union, you need to be consistent across the board with all the employees.
So let's just walk through this.
Okay.
Yes.
Just
Okay.
take a second.
Yeah.
ready?
Okay, so let's start on the 3rd page in.
All right, so everything before that is sacrosanct.
We're walking back to this. All right, so everything on the 3rd page is, you can't touch.
So that starts Series 700 debt, Series 800 state.
That whole page, you're not touching.
Can't touch.
Right.
No. Okay.
Okay, the next page back. Going up to the enterprise funds,
No water, no sewer.
no TV.
Wait, so, wait, put the thing down so I can see it here.
Right here,
So,
the enterprise
No
funds.
sewer,
So up or
water,
down here?
TV.
so nothing from here.
You can cut those all you want, it has no effect upon your budget.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well,
So-
so no.
So
Then-
there is not so much that you can't, but it's ineffectual.
Okay, public works I assume is no.
That's essential.
You need to plow your roads.
Yeah, okay, but-
All right,
Now,
talk
we
to
can
the-
bring that negative though, right?
Well, but that doesn't help us.
Snow and ice.
Not snow and ice, because then you can't
Okay.
deficit spend it.
Right.
Okay.
Top of the page, education, can't touch it.
Okay.
At least not without a riot on our hands.
Well, no, by the law, you can't touch the education budget once it passes the
Right.
meeting.
Oh, okay. Public safety, I would say no, since
Correct.
that's the whole point of this, is to increase public safety.
All right, so the top of the page there's a bunch of things that you're required to fund. You need to have a tax collector.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a treasurer. You need to have an assessor.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a planning board.
What, this says 61,000 for select board, or
That's-
That's a
72.
secretary.
That's
is that
for-
salaries for real people?
Yes.
Yeah, the secretary.
Then how
Yes.
come they give so much back in free cash? Why is it? It just seems like their average turn back is 5,200.
That's because they also fund the office supplies, so a lot of money comes back there.
Okay, so the moderator's got nothing. Anyway. Town administrator, that's you, all right, David, we'll leave you alone. Finance committee is nothing. Reserve fund,
Well, on a lot of these, just to throw out there, to look at all the different commissions, the moderator, the finance committee, select boards, all the different boards and things, there's a lot of people getting paid out there.
You can make the
Yeah,
commissions
but you're
non-paid
required to have these
positions.
people. You need a town clerk, you need a registrar.
No, not the
Those-
clerks, I think of more of a,
As a
of
full-time
of a
job.
job. She's an employee.
You're talking
What?
the Park and Rec Commission, the
Yes.
Assessors Commission?
Yeah, just the Board of Health, the Board of Assessors, the planning board,
You need those.
cemetery board. Do
You're
they,
required to have them.
well, you're required to have them, but are you required to pay for them?
No.
okay, so how much?
I'm
is
not
that
saying
total
get rid of
up to?
them, get rid of these people, but to listen to
Make
some
them
of
truly
these.
volunteer.
Well, listening to some of them, like certain of them only meet so
Do
often.
we have the authority to stop paying them, or is that like a bylaw thing where they have a set rate that they get paid for their work?
No, we can make a suggestion to the select board that they make them non-paid advisory boards. And they can decide.
Well, first
So
of
as I'm
all,
asking, do we, the finance committee, have that authority to stop paying?
no.
Okay.
We
can only
can suggest.
Everything, we don't have authority to
We
do
don't do any
anything.
of this. We don't have authority to cut anything.
Well,
We're only
what gets,
suggesting.
Yeah,
well, and what gets printed on this page and presented at town meeting is
It's still-
what we
Is our
present.
opinion.
Is our,
It goes to town meeting, but we put what's on this page.
Yeah.
if the select board
That's our-
agrees with it,
Well, we can
No.
present our own.
yes.
Well, let me ask you a question. What are these numbers all totally up to?
I don't know. I don't even know if I have all the right numbers, but I was just noticing, there's a lot of different,
It's not gonna add up to
And that's what I
270,
was-
but it might add up to 50 or 60.
but that's when I was asking, how are some of the other
6,
commissions, do they get
11.
paid? That's what I was asking if.
Yeah, so
If they're paid.
you get some, you've got about $25,000 of your budget is being paid
I
in
get
salaries
about
for
30.
part-time elected or officials.
So what I'm saying is that the omnibus budget, and by extension the omnibus budget adjustment, is presented from the finance committee to the town meeting. It
Correct.
is on a warrant that the select board signs to get it to town meeting, which does not mean that they agree with it. Presumably, there's a lot of discussion around the override for fire, and they might not all agree with it, but that's different than them approving to put it on the warrant to put it in front of the town people.
Right.
So what we have control over and what we can do is change these figures.
Well, the last thing I wanted to show is that, the override is totally for the fire.
We've been talking about this for months, since December. Okay, so we knew that it was going to be a stretch to add 4 firefighter positions to the budget. We went to the head and we presented a balanced budget to town, maybe back in May, knowing that we'd have to come back and take another look and put our
Right, and it's
stuff together so that we
and
could-
before that town meeting, everyone on this board and everyone on the select board said that the fire department was going to be a priority, and that went out the window the minute the town meeting was over, and it was pretty disgusting.
But each time we've come here, we've been pretty clear, okay, well, let's talk about where the cuts are gonna be, what's the
So
plan B?
this contingent.
So be very careful about talking about cuts here, because what you're gonna have to do is, like I said, you've only got $2 million in the budget where you can go in for 2.7 thousand.
But if an override doesn't go through, that's what's gonna happen,
Well,
or need
but,
to happen.
but I mean, you're gonna build a library but shutter the library department. You're gonna build a senior center, community center, shutter the council.
Well, they should all
so,
thought about
well, so
that.
the select board should not have put us in this position in the first place.
That's
I'm
right.
just saying.
They should all thought of that.
We've been giving them options for weeks and weeks.
I'd rather have an empty one of those buildings than we're gonna have a lot more liability if we have a fire.
If somebody
and
gets hurt.
Someone gets hurt and they don't have enough people or they can't get there fast enough. Especially since last night, they even said we are in deep doo-doo, you know, pretty much, and they knew.
So now is the time for us to exercise leadership
Right.
on this issue. If this is important, then we need to exercise leadership and show the townspeople and the taxpayers that it is a priority and that it's something that we have to do. And this is the best way that we can put it
Well, but
together.
the override should not be for the fire department. The fire department's happy. The override should be for, well, if you still want to have Park and Rec, you need an override. If you still want to have library, you need an override. If you still want to have council on aging, you need an override.
That's right.
The fire department's the fire department.
I think what that does, and again, I just want to caution that it's like Bill said, it's easy for us to think about numbers and not about plans. Okay, so we certainly don't want to be in a situation where we're pitting departments against each other. And that's a real danger here.
Well, we all have the same plan. We need a full-time fire department day. That's the plan. Now, how do we get there?
That's what we've been agreeing with and what the select board says they've been agreeing to.
So, okay. If the override, which I personally feel is a stretch because we're not prepared for it, and I can't honestly say, again, I will say, do we all feel that we are managing the current budget to the best of the ability for our taxpayers?
The board has always expressed that if we're not fully funding fire, then no.
That's
I agree.
right.
I mean, I've spent lately a lot of nights just going through all the numbers and looking at them, and there's a lot of things I'd rather give up our money and have a fire department. I would hope the select board rather give up their money and have a fire department. I think some of these other departments, I know it's going to take a little bit from everybody, but I think we can, you know, and not, you know, and combine some of these. Maybe you could share supplies. Maybe we could share like one coordinator and do something, but we need to work together as a full team. We have right now, it seems like everybody is their individual department. You have all these people are in there for their own, no one wants to work together as a full team, like the team of Hadley. It seems like everybody has their own interests, has their own budget, don't touch mine, and this,
I think that's exactly what they were talking about.
And I think we're all in agreement about that. But the fact is that the warrant is voted on Wednesday to make it in time for special town meeting. It is the 11th hour.
Right.
So the decision in front of us right now is about fire and what we cut, if we cut, to make sure that there is fire.
Right, we have to have a decision on that, because if we go in and say the special town, the override is only for the fire department, I mean, that could go either way, but
so,
you know, I don't see how you could possibly have some of these other programs in effect when you don't have a fire department to protect them. That's idiotic.
So then I want to take a step back and ask the question, when we bring this to the voters, is it a wiser strategy to say that we are in dire need of this override for fire and talk about the importance of fire and what it's lacking? Or to say fire is extremely important, so we're funding it no matter what, and there are these non-essential services that are being cut unless you approve an override?
Well, I think you're going to have a lot more people approve an override if you just saw what happened at the last town meeting with the senior center, right? We had 500 people. We never had that many people. And
Yeah, one Lowe's in Home Depot.
oh, but okay, let's talk about when the first program started coming up with the fire, substation, the library, and the senior center. Listening to the debate on town floor, the seniors, it was very positive. A lot of people wanted it. There was a chance that the substation wasn't even going to go through. Why do they need all those firemen? We got enough of those. I'm telling you, if there's a good chance that fire won't get funded, but I think if you're saying they're not going to have park and rec, or you're going to have the entire town here.
I agree, actually.
You'll have
You
the
get the
entire
special
town
interest groups and
that'll
they'll be
take
out there.
care of it,
Mhm.
because you see how many people showed up just at one of these meetings when they thought the park and rec something was going to happen. You saw how many people came for the seniors. You saw how many people came for the library. That's important to this town.
I'm only of half a mind on it, but it sounds like the board's very resolute on going forward with that strategy. So for the sake of time, I think number one priority is going through this and finding $270,000. We have this meeting, we have next,
Yep.
because Wednesday is the
Yep.
deadline. That's all right.
I don't think we're pegging departments against each other. We've been talking a lot about fire. We addressed Park and Rec because of the timing of what was happening with that department and wanting to look at what it was, what we need today versus what it was
Right, and a lot of those
5 years ago. And that's why it wasn't pegging them against each other. It was the timing. We had an opportunity, and the select board, which they, chose not to look at these things. And right there, we could have said, I don't know, could your park and rec coordinator, which is now,
whatever. Yeah.
right, okay, could you work with the library person? Maybe reduce hours? Could you be that person for the senior center as well and not have to hire somebody? So you're saving funds there too, but we didn't get that opportunity to do that. So, it wasn't pegging departments against each other. That's not where I was coming from. It was we had the opportunity because our long-term coordinator, not director, left us. And so we wanted to look what was happening. I used to be a park and rec commissioner. I know what it did 15 years ago versus now. I'm also one of those people that created all those independent boards for sports. And they still exist today. And they're not run by Park and Rec. But I do agree that they do host other activities. So doesn't the library. And now we have the Chinese immersion school with Kathy, our past person. She's coordinating the same programs.
So she's drawing off.
So it was just like, it was the time to look at it and, not judging anybody or that department. So,
At the end of the day, I don't think anyone on this board, or even on the select board for that matter, wants to have either a fireman or a citizen, or even just property for that matter, have something bad happen because the fire department was underfunded.
Well, now at this point, now that we've been public about it and how we know that there's a problem, it's negligent on our part not to do it.
Right,
So
exactly.
again, I think
And there's
we're all in
we're in a
agreement,
liability
and I
up
think
there.
we need to find money now, and it's already 9:20.
so we need to carry this over again until Tuesday, but I think
Yeah.
we gotta take this home
So
and come up with our ideas
We'll come
at
up with
home.
but David's gonna have to, for us, move
Well-
that number to this side, and we're gonna have to find
Mhm.
some other numbers to make it on the
Make it
negative
right.
side to balance
Yeah,
somehow, right?
and we're gonna have to work on this
If
sheet
if
to
we
do
want
it.
this on this side, the only other way to make
You guys
this
gotta
work,
show me a plan before I do that. You guys gotta show
to
me a
move
plan.
this to this
What
side.
do you mean a plan? We just told you the plan.
I heard what your goal is, but not what your plan is.
So then talking about a plan,
We're planning on having an override.
half off the top of my head, looking at non-essential services, human
Okay.
services, culture and recreation, we talk about consolidating positions. How that translates into our numbers is slashing their budgets and then working with them to consolidate those positions or making it work. I want to see what we can cut from human services and cultures and rec without crippling, I suppose, to say, the services they offer, but cutting them. how far that gets us, and then what a plan might look like to spread the remaining amount that we need
Well, I mean,
across Series 100 through.
you can't
I
touch.
guess it'd be
I assume we can't touch the board
200.
of health.
No, you're required to have a board of health.
Do they get paid though? I mean,
Single-
when we charge.
hang on. One
They
thing at a time.
generate income.
Veteran services, we're
Yeah, you can't touch that.
Touch that.
No,
Okay.
right, you can't do that.
Okay, so library is 200.
Can't touch that.
Park commission is now 45. So there's not even enough. Even if you'd have to like get rid of.
I keep waiting to hear you say the senior center budget, which is $80,000.
Did we skip over council on aging?
That's one full-time person and 2 part-time people.
Yeah, that's 90 right there total.
Was it 90?
Well, it says 90 here.
Well, you have other employees besides.
Yeah.
In the town report, it didn't say.
So you're talking about $335,000 just amongst
Oh, you got the second page.
council on aging, library, and park commission.
If you do the library, that means nobody can use library services in this town or others.
Well,
towns.
so
I mean,
You're not getting rid of the library.
Right, I don't think we'd suggest cutting $200,000.
if you cut it below the amount that they need to maintain their certification, that means nobody has library privileges anywhere. So I mean,
Is that $200,000 that bare minimum amount to it?
I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands.
well, and this is why
You can also not
this
put
is
in
why
OPEB.
we suggested that we, get rid of the health insurance for part-time elected officials. We would have gotten 60-odd K out of that. If we had gone through with the idea that we were going to eliminate Park and Rec and move some services over to the library, we would have been halfway there without having to cut anything else.
Right, but it
But
didn't
now we're
pan
kind
out.
of in a position where we're kind of stuck because we would have to just like eliminate everything in order to cover this fire department.
So again, when I asked what can we do to cut these budgets without crippling their services, what you just described with the library was exactly that. If they fall below a certain amount and don't have their certification, that would cripple their services, that we can't have. So I'm wondering, what is that number? Is it 150,000, 100,000? What is that bare minimum number we
I need to ask what that number is, but
Cool.
I know it's a formula.
Fair enough.
Mhm.
Right.
So that we need. Council on Aging is the other big ticket item for looking at Series 500. A breakdown of the
Aging's got what?
Council on Aging is the other. It's the 90,000.
That's the whole budget for the.
Well, the
For
library's
senior center.
200 and park commission's 45, and we got to come up with 250. That's the problem.
We already took a chunk out of the park commission.
Yeah, but if you cut that, half of that 90 out, then you're cutting out that entire program.
Right.
I mean, as it is right now, it runs on volunteers with just one full-time director.
What if we
You don't have more
just took-
employees, there's more employees than one full-time director there.
What's that?
There's more employees than one full-time director.
They're almost all volunteers.
No, but there's other employees that make up that 90.
I know very well what there's Elsie Waskevitz, who's probably never gonna come back to work because she's in the hospital, but she's a half-time employee,
She was a paid position.
half-time.
That's right.
It's in your budget book, how many full-time equivalents
Correct.
that they have.
And we'll take a look at that.
What if we took every line that isn't untouchable and added it all up and then took whatever percentage of each thing, just.
Well, that's how we started this discussion, but there's no's written next to almost everything on here.
That's what I'm saying, why don't we find out what isn't enough and we'll add them all up and just take a percentage that equals the 250.
Well, I don't
Right, that's
think-
what we're thinking. That's a good plan, but David seems to bring us down to just the only ones he's saying is the library, the park and rec, and the senior center. Those are the three only
Those are
ones.
the only ones that we can touch.
Can I ask you a
And
question?
I don't know if
I
that's
know
what seems
the
right.
fire department generates funds from services that they provide. Do you think that with the the more employees, will we be able to generate more funding?
You should be able to.
So I guess because if you're able to do that, would it offset some of the cost of
In
the employees.
Next year it would.
Right.
I don't think you could get.
It's not gonna be 200,000, but I'm wondering what the chief might think it might be. Because with two of them, they generated
30 to 45.
30 to 45,000.
Yeah.
And is there room more there? Is there more room there
Yeah, there's
to
more
make more money?
inspections that can be done, and there's more plan review that can be done, and all of this, you get a fee for all of that. There's more fines that would be issued.
Right, so I'm wondering what the chief thinks maybe that he could bring in, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a hypothetical question, but because that's what my thought was, is that if he has more employees, then he'll be able to do more things to generate more of those fees. That might help offset his.
That's if there are inspections or something going undone now. So
Right, so that's what I'm asking.
That's a good question, and whether there's already a new employee in there who is intending to help with the
Yeah.
inspection. So I don't know, are those additional inspections or
Well,
is
that's
that
it.
just helping? So it's a good question.
That is.
But
so,
it's not going to generate the whole. They're not going to pay for themselves. That's not going to happen.
And so
No, but it's helpful to know that
can.
that department might be able to generate more funds that'll eventually come into our budget. They can offset.
I mean, so basically, what we've just learned is that there isn't, without just eliminating everything, there's no possible way to do this.
Well, hold on. So I'll return to one of my original suggestions. Obviously, we need the contingent override for the full amount to fund fire going forward in fiscal year 19. If the contingent override doesn't pass, could we have a budget that funds full-time fire for 6 months out of the year, which effectively cuts that in half for fiscal year 18, cutting that number down from 270 to, obviously rough math, 135 or whatever, but with health insurance and all that.
I think it's about $80,000 for 3 positions for 6 months.
It does that include the health
That
benefit?
does not.
Right, so
Right,
including health benefits. But that effectively cuts it in half. We are obviously putting ourselves in the position of then, well, if we don't have that money, we have to fire them in fiscal year 19. But I think we made it a priority that we would not fire firefighters, we would cut other services, as we're looking at now.
So it would give us 6 months to figure out
Kicking
what
the
the
can.
other
Yeah, I like it.
services are. Well, I thought we agreed on that, actually. You brought it up, and then David brought that up too, right?
Well, but I guess the reason that we didn't want to go down that road is because then, what do you do in 19?
When talking about the override, it was important that we funded the full amount,
Right.
because that way we're securing the funding, on
Right.
half override,
Right.
as it were.
Right,
But so for the non-contingent override option,
right.
if we go with this half, we're looking for 120, 130, you can get the numbers for us, and we can find maybe that more feasibly than $250,000. I think it's a Hail
not
Mary
have
maybe,
the-
but our closest we can get.
And not have an override come October, right? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
we're still obviously shooting for the override,
Oh.
Yeah.
but this is our backup plan
Because-
when the override fails.
because-
Oh,
If
okay.
it fails. hopefully
Because
not.
the override, we're shooting for that because that's for next year. That
Includes
stays on.
next year, fully funded
It includes,
permanently.
right, okay.
Because even if we do this other plan, it's not going to get us through next year. We're gonna be sitting doing the same thing. Right? So,
None of this is easy. I know this is a very difficult task and very difficult conversation to have.
Well, and the problem is that there was no support up until this point. So now it's an emergency, and there's only drastic measures will work now.
So then, David, I'm wondering what, again, looking at non-essentials and what we can cut. I know it's slim, but picking out a few thousand from where we can, going back to Series 100 and 200 public safety, what is available to cut? Not talking personnel, not even talking salaries, but in department budgets, if we're talking even office supplies at this point, if we're talking putting off capital purchases, if we're making everyone tighten their belts, right,
can
to
the
cut
town hall
across
come
the
up with
board.
another $5,000?
Yeah, so I did a lot of that work back in January when the school budget came in at $600,000 increase. I went back through all the budgets and I said, where can we trim whatever I could? So I've kind of done that already. I'm happy to try and do it again.
There's not much to trim.
Well, you look at your reserve fund of $50,000.
Yeah.
Can you?
But then we use 35,000 of that this year.
Well, sometimes you do.
Sometimes we don't.
It's there for the emergencies, and the definition of emergency is when something goes wrong that shouldn't.
And maybe we should use some of the reserve fund, our reserve
So
fund.
maybe
But the little-
that's.
yeah.
I mean, that would be
I
an
mean,
imprudent
just-
but relatively painless way of coming up with $5,000.
right.
And then there's the discussion on OPEB. Again, as reluctant as I am to continue not fully funding where we need to be with that 50,000, again, if we can kick the can, and if we're looking at an override or looking at fiscal year 19, if fire is really the priority and we are at our last straw and cannot find money, would we be comfortable not paying ourselves back that 50,000 for OPEB that we essentially borrowed against ourselves? Is it an option even on the table? Or a partial amount? Or
Let me
something?
tell you that your pay-as-you-go amount, I think, is 213. So we're below the pay-as-you-go, so we should at least try to get
the
to
213.
because you've got OPEB on the run. You know,
Mhm.
the last thing we want to be doing is losing all the ground that we've gained and see that liability grow in the future.
Well, so
So
here's the problem. Every time anything gets brought up, there's always 7 reasons why you shouldn't do that.
I'm trying to meet you halfway here, rather than the 50,000.
Right,
Take it up by 7.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't want to couple 0213. I might want to increase a little, but
Mhm.
not doing the full 50,000 as a last resort.
Yeah.
I'm
You don't
asking, is
wanna
that on the
make-
table?
You don't want to make a habit of that.
No, not at all. I don't think any of this should be a habit.
I know. I'm just saying.
But we've expressed a dire commitment to hiring these fire for the rest of the fiscal year 18.
I think, right. I think
So,
somehow we got to suffer through
So,
this.
so then,
So-
well, hold on a second. So then if we did, let's say we do that, say you take a few pennies from here and there and so on and so forth. Then when 19 rolls around,
oh,
we got the same problem.
Oh,
We're
this-
still going to be asking for an override.
well, we're gonna
Well-
ask for the override anyways right now, but I'm just saying, we need to get this to David right now.
No, you can.
No, we give
can
Tuesday.
do it on Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay, but
Yeah.
still, now, I
Like
mean, it's still gonna be
he's-
just as bad
Like
Tuesday.
he said, we can
Yeah.
give him what our thoughts are, but he might not change it.
Well, no, he doesn't. have that
He might
option.
not change the column of where that fire department and stuff goes. He might not put it in this column for us.
How do you mean?
Well, then we
Did you
won't
say
sign
that?
off on it.
I said I wanted to hear the plan.
He wanted to, right, you have
Like,
to agree
these are
with
our
what we're
numbers,
saying.
technically. We present.
I get that.
So,
But we want to be all in sync. If we're together, then we can,
could I ask, Linda, would you mind, do you have any thoughts, because you have a great, any,
Actually, one thing I was thinking about is how our speakers earlier this evening were talking about getting people together and talking.
mhm.
Ask every single department head what they've got to do given this situation. What do you have to give? Do you have anything to give?
right,
Well, I wouldn't really want to give this, but I could because of this situation. I don't know. I'm a little torn about that because once you give something up in your budget, you're not going to get it back.
Right.
So, but if it was part of a plan, all right. Let's say my budget had some flexibility. I don't know whether I would need that money or not, but I need it there in case I do because of things that might happen in the department that I need to pursue something. Then I need to have it in my budget. I don't know that I'm going to use it. Let's say you and your reserve fund, rather than decrease it,
Mhm.
increase it, and increase it by $20,000, and let people put in all of their I might need it's, which would probably be higher. You
Because
probably
we
cut
can give
more.
it back.
Yes, and that you're sort of the
Mm.
reserve for all of our we might need it. I don't know what that number would come to, but that might be another thing worth pursuing.
Well, but so-
Your little pieces add up after a while. Maybe they don't add up to what you need, but maybe it addresses that question that you're asking yourselves, that the town will be asking. Are you making the most efficient use of your budget? And that's what gets you the rest of the way.
Mhm.
Because yes, you are, because you did these things, and
Well,
the department
that
heads
would
all
be-
chipped in, and we made these adjustments, and so
Mhm.
this is the best we can do. Now, please support an
Well,
override.
And if we had 3 months before town meeting, that would be perfect.
It would be great to be planning on this for annual town meeting. You know, I wish there was a way that you could hop
So-
to annual town meeting and take care of some of these other
So
things that
there
we've
is
also
act-
been talking about.
There is actually a way, and no one likes the idea, but we'll throw it out there, is get our act together for annual town meeting and fund the fire department out of stabilization for this town meeting.
But
Well,
then you might be laying people off if an override doesn't pass.
Right.
My understanding is that to utilize stabilization, you have to have a 2/3 vote in town meeting.
Yep.
And it
So
has to be
that's-
like,
Just as tough, if not tougher, than the override.
Well, except that it's not increasing their pocketbook, so,
But you're saying, you're suggesting something that is a one-time hop
yep.
to.
well, but that
and
gives us
not-
the 6 months to
What
prepare.
you're saying is not, you're not using the stabilization in case the override doesn't pass. What you're
Yeah.
saying is, we're gonna use it until we can get to the point where we can ask you for a better override in the spring.
Well, that's, yeah, exactly.
So you're looking
because,
for a one-time hop,
you know, because what happened was,
I don't know.
the last time, you know, when we talked about this, for the last town meeting, not the last regular town meeting, not the special, you know, we were gonna get all ready for fall town meeting, and we were gonna figure this whole thing out for, you know, the firemen, et cetera, and so forth, and then one select board meeting after another went by, and it just like became, you know, everything else came up, and it was a non-issue, the fire department. Now we're getting close to this town meeting, and all of a sudden it's back to being an emergency the week before we need to have the,
So maybe we should just throw it back on the select board and say, here you go. Figure it out.
well, I mean, essentially by saying we're gonna eliminate this and eliminate that and eliminate the other thing, oh, catastrophe, but we're gonna have firemen, maybe that's the budget we put through, and then the select board can explain themselves to the people.
Okay, that's,
Either way, we need to find what we're eliminating.
So here's a suggestion. Your meeting next Tuesday, I'm gonna post your meeting tonight. And maybe, given the lateness of the hour, it's time for us to go home and think of other things. Over the weekend, sort of put your thoughts on pieces of paper, come back with your thoughts organized for Tuesday, and we talk about the options. We use free cash. We use
Well,
stabilization.
we used all the free cash, it's like
As I
50,000 left.
Yeah, 50,000 left, or 50,000. All right. Use stabilization. You do the Nixon plan. You do the.
Well, the Nixon plan says we load it all on the fire department.
I'm saying this is your range of options. I'm not
are you
saying,
available by email over the weekend if we have questions?
cell phone is better.
Okay. Text, you do text?
I do text, yeah.
Okay.
What is
I'll be-
the number?
No, he's on camera.
No, it's not.
Don't do that.
I have it, I'll send it to you.
It's a public record.
Can we have your address too?
Yeah. I'm in the phone book. So, yeah, my address is in the phone book, and my cell phone is a public record. So,
The town paid for it,
yes, it does.
so it makes it public.
It makes it public.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
So, the other option is Gabriel's articulation of a plan, which is, you know, that we start thinking about where can we step from this stone to that stone to get us to 2019. Another one is the plan that we were talking about before, which is we just go in and find $270,000 out of here. So those are 5 options that we sort of kicked around. What's the best one? What's the one that you're willing to recommend?
So the Gabriel's plan, when it says we're just putting a Band-Aid on it, kicking the can, how much do we need to find to do that?
That half amount for half the firefighters' salaries, because we're going half a year.
89,000.
So then we only have to find 89.
No.
Is that what you said?
No,
90?
yeah.
90,000.
That's not even, you gotta go higher for the benefits.
Well, it's,
We're just talking about just
so
getting it
for
passed.
round number, why don't you take half of the 250?
I would say at least 100.
Yeah.
So 100.
Keep
Can we
in
have the
mind,
number?
270,
Tuesday.
if you, all right, 270 back out, 50,000 for OPEB, that means you've got a 220, half that, so 110.
Yeah, 106, but okay.
100, okay, 110. Now that's including the 50 going back into OPEB.
No.
No,
That's not including the
that's
50
no.
going back, because we're
That's
saying,
open.
let's put that off for
We're-
now.
And I don't agree with
Okay.
that.
Well,
Okay.
but
We're at last resorts.
I think it's slow poison to do that. But,
Right.
You know, it's an
But
option.
that's what
It's
you're
an
saying,
option.
that's what we, it's an option. So 110, and if we use 50 of it free cash, so now we're looking for 60,000,
Right, but it means you don't have a capital plan.
right?
So in 6 months, here's a resident say, well, you found it for 6 months. Can't you find it for another? You know what I'm saying? It's like catch-22. It's
but at least then we can do the plan where we go to the department heads and say, all right, we, you know,
where can you cut some stuff?
where can you cut some stuff?
And you're
And I
building-
think-
you're building your credibility,
And this,
right?
Yeah.
and I think this next time around, when it comes to 19, instead of having the department heads parade in front of the select board, before that ever happens, they need to come in here and we need to go through the numbers line by line, not all this Pollyanna stuff that goes on in the select board where everybody's so happy to have everyone. We need teeth.
So David, you mentioned the capital plan, and if we take from free cash, we're gonna be able to fund that, as it
okay,
were.
So, well, I mean, the portions of the, okay, so the handheld radar guns are free cash. Anything that says capital
Right,
stabilization.
can't we move those into borrowing?
I suppose you could.
So we're essentially asking,
Yeah, but
I mean-
that's such a small amount. You don't want to borrow. Would you?
I mean, we're already borrowing, there's 80,000 here for the F-500, the administrative vehicle's 80,000.
You don't mean borrow with an override.
Borrow, however, we're borrowing the truck and the vehicle.
We aren't yet. The capital, have we voted?
That's capital.
I mean, I don't, that's just proposed. It
Yeah,
wasn't voted.
there's been no recommendations yet. Capital meeting on Monday.
Yeah, that's a
What
request.
is sustainability? What is that?
Oh, I was thinking,
So my question is,
I was
does
just
this
thinking
borrow mean
library.
that we're
so
asking for a
if you
capital
take a
override,
portion of
essentially?
15,
I'm sorry?
15,
This,
that's
when it says borrow, it means we are
25,000
asking for a
times
capital
10
override?
plus
A debt
that
exclusion
to
override, yes.
55,
Debt exclusion override,
and
yeah.
David
Okay.
another five,
It doesn't cost
town hall or somewhere.
Hmm?
the taxpayers
60,000.
anything.
It
does.
does.
Which
It does.
is-
Oh,
so
okay.
We're
my
asking for
breakdown
that.
is, we need one
And if we were to
ten,
use free
right?
cash,
And
then capital planning committee
we're gonna
would
give
be forced
free
I get that.
to
so
change
you-
this from capital stabilization, these line
Well,
items
you know,
to.
either you're not purchasing the items, or you're adding to the borrowing
Right,
that we're already doing.
but that is an option.
It's an option.
Yeah.
It's a crummy option, but it's an option.
10. So, I was just thinking, I mean, just as this is a thought, if we needed to come down to the 60, if we had 100, if we need to come up with 110, we give all our free cash right now, that's 60,000. Say the senior center, park and rec, and library give back 15 each, or around, you know, that's just doing it evenly. That's 45,000. Say the finance committee, we give a reserve, we have money in the reserve still left, we give 10,000. So now we just need another 5. Maybe town hall can come up with 5.
And that means you're not giving your non-union employees their 1.5%.
No, that would
No.
be included.
No.
That would be included.
They would be giving them that. We would be giving them their 1.5%.
Yeah.
Based upon what
On those
the
numbers,
figures
yeah.
that you have there, yeah.
Okay.
Can you
Can I
do that
make
more
it-
neatly?
Yeah.
It's a little hard to follow on this.
Yeah, I was just scratching. But I was just, and two, I mean, I was just doing it evenly, senior, park and rec, library, 15, 15, 15, but park and rec, we already know can do more because of that extra spot. right?
No, he
but
already
they-
took it
It's already
out.
out.
That's
He already
took
took
it
it out.
Oh,
took it
so
out.
you already took that out.
How about reducing hours? But the commissioners have to set that.
Yeah, the commissioners could be a 0.
Well, I
At
also
least.
think you should take,
We
we
could take
should
the
add up all
commissioners-
this stuff and say people need to be truly volunteer.
Right. But, with
But that's
the,
not our call right now.
No,
That's
but we
right.
can suggest it and put it in the suggested budget.
I think the
Yeah.
commissions or that don't meet on a regular basis could be asked to
Well,
make
I
them
mean, you
advisory
heard-
boards.
but if we,
You heard the gentleman, all of their boards are unpaid, they're all
But
volunteer.
we can't do that. We would have to ask select board, and that's certainly not going to happen by Wednesday.
Well,
for a
but,
plan like that.
but check it out, everything that we're suggesting here, we can't do either. The select board would have to approve all these cuts anyway, so it's the same
No, they
thing.
don't. So they don't approve those. So this page
The town people.
goes from finance committee, and then goes to town meeting. Goes straight from finance committee to town meeting. The select board's role in that is saying, do we let this go to town meeting?
Mhm.
Regardless of what they feel about what we present, they're certainly going to let this go to town meeting. They're not saying they approve it or disapprove of it. They're saying they're letting it go to town meeting.
They'll let
But
them
we are
vote.
presenting numbers. Those numbers about what we're paying the commissions, that's because of bylaw, correct me if I'm wrong, what we're obligated to pay for them. So if it's a matter of changing bylaw, that is select board policy
No.
and they make,
Okay.
not,
Just where they exist.
It's a
Yeah, so,
fee. It's not like they're on payroll, right?
so the way the bylaws are written, you're not obligated to receive a certain amount when you're elected that position?
School committee.
They don't get
yeah,
anything.
no, I don't think if there's anything in our bylaws, so this is just a
Moderator is
customary, customary payment that we've been making, that
Right.
many towns do.
Well, we gotta ask those people
No,
to take
he
one for the
actually
team.
said many
Well,
towns
mhm.
don't anymore.
I think you should distinguish between the boards that have employees and those that don't.
No,
Yeah,
no,
that's-
but we're talking about not the
Maybe.
not the paid employees, but we're talking about the commissioners and the people who sit on the boards who are volunteer.
I know, and I'm saying some of those commissioners supervise employees who actually do the work of the department. Others are the department. And
Right.
what you're saying is there'll be no department.
so like the Board of Assessors, there's 3 of them that are, that's the board, but that's not necessarily the employee. Dan's the employee,
Exactly.
right?
Right, and Dan gets to keep his money for sure.
So you can make those non-paid positions.
I'm just saying, you
And-
should distinguish.
Right, like the
the
planning
planning
board is the
They are the planning
department.
department.
They are
They're-
the
They have no employees, they have no staff.
They
have
are
no
the
typists,
employees.
They have,
Right.
they have no.
So you could get rid of,
no
so
staff. So they
the other one would be the Park and Rec Commission.
have staff.
They
Yeah,
have staff.
but you can make them an advisory board and the staff would go under, David.
Okay.
So to sum up, there are certain commissioners, for example, that receive a stipend,
Mhm.
and we're not mandated by law to give them that stipend.
Correct.
So if we slash that line item,
Mhm.
then hypothetically, they wouldn't receive that money.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm happy to turn back my 150.
You get 150.
Well, if that is a tool in our tool belt, then we should put it on the list and look at it on Tuesday. I'd always assumed that we were obligated to
No,
do the nature of the election stuff.
but you have to think about which departments, like when this says,
Yeah, that's
that
what we'll
are-
go through the list and talk about it on Tuesday.
make up the actual
Mhm.
department.
So Linda talked about talking to the department heads, and I know
Mhm.
the time is short, but I mean, what we don't want to see is unintended consequences. What may look good on paper may not have the right impact that you're looking for, so, you know, so feel free to reach out to your department heads and talk some of this stuff over.
Between now and
Yeah.
Tuesday?
Yeah, again,
Is there a department heads
Am I
meeting
supposed to
between now
quit
and
my
Tuesday?
regular job?
We could do that for Tuesday and see, it may, I don't know, we can pull up, what if we put our heads together? Department heads.
Why can't we invite them all on Tuesday?
They're,
Well, that's
After
gonna
the
be.
vote.
Yeah, yeah.
Would any of us be able to make a department heads meeting during the day?
No,
I can
not,
take a
not
lunch
between
hour.
now and Tuesday.
I actually think it would be better without you.
Right,
Even better then.
yeah.
I mean, you know, one on top. you're giving the guidance, right? You're giving the
Right.
direction. We're looking for blank dollars out of whatever. Yeah.
Mhm.
What can you
Worst you can get
shave
is nothing.
permanently?
Right.
The worst you can get from is no help at all.
Mhm.
But that's
That's
where
where
you
we're at
are.
now.
So I
Right, so it can only be
try.
better.
And it always, you know, in the department that you see that gives, or that will say, you know, here you go. You want to then later help out them, because you see what they'll go to. They'll be like, okay, you know, they'll take one for the team, and it doesn't go unnoticed. That, I mean, the department that gives back.
But we don't have anything to give back to them later down the road.
No, well, maybe.
Well,
If
I
they
mean,
ask for, if they come
so-
to us and say there's a dire need for that, we're going to take them very seriously, because we
Reserve
know
funds,
that
looking
they're
at
not
some-
just storing money.
I know, but so
I'm just saying.
I'm not saying, okay, you give us now, we'll remember you later. It,
No, well, so there's a difference here, right? Because we're trying to put a Band-Aid on this to say what's going to happen if we don't get the override, right? So we're going to put that out there. And then next year, we're going to ask for the override again, because we're going to keep asking for it till we get it, because we can't continue this way. The pie has to get bigger. There's no question about it.
and I'll tell you this, and we might only get $150. We attend a lot more meetings. We attend a lot of meetings. Besides our meetings, we are at select board meetings, we're at other
Right.
meetings.
I'm
So
2 to
I
3
would
a
like
week.
to see the select board give something up too.
So, David, can we rely on you
Sorry.
in a department heads
I'll give
meeting?
up my pay.
I'm sorry.
You come up here, right? All right, well, there you go, sir. Thank you.
Can we rely on you, I don't know, and or Linda to convey this at a department's head meeting before we meet on Tuesday? Or give it a good
We'll
effort?
have to be on Tuesday.
We're both out Monday.
Yeah,
Right.
we're both on.
Yeah, before we meet on Tuesday. So
Right.
We'll do what we can.
I started this day at 5 o'clock, and I got to start tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So,
Mine's
So I think we've got a
4:30.
clear idea of what we're doing on Tuesday in our meeting. So, motion to adjourn?
second.
Motion, second.
All in favor?
Right.
Aye.